The adventurers had nothing to do for the moment. Out in the wilderness, loot followed one rule that nobody argued with. No contribution, no share. In the last fight, the hired adventurers hadn't been the ones bleeding. They hadn't pushed the line or broken the camp, so they didn't touch the spoils. But Anna wasn't letting anyone stand around. Under her orders, they started dismantling the knoll camp and hauling logs to the mine entrance. They ringed several tunnel mouths with rough barricades, stacking timber into simple fortifications. Cat frowned while dragging a beam into place. Why didn't the gnolls build their camp right at the mine's edge? Wouldn't that be easier to defend? Nobody answered. The gnolls were dead, and no one claimed to understand how those beasts thought. After the slaughter, the White River Valley garrison finally had somewhere to pour their rage. They piled the bodies, burned them until the stench turned to ash, then returned to the camp to sort what little was left. The truth was disappointing. Gnolls were poor. No jewelry, no coin worth counting, no weapons worth keeping. Just crude tools and filthy supplies. Mostly food. Food that only gnolls, kobolds, goblins, and similar races could stomach. Roots, rancid meat, half-rotted scraps. Stuff humans ate in desperate eras, but not now, not in peacetime. Anna had already prepared proper rations. She sent 2 men to handle logistics. Fresh bread with a sweet smell, dried meat, and enough clean water to last. The gnolls' provisions were thrown away. Only the logs mattered. Logs meant walls. Walls meant breathing room if the gnoll shaman really did try a night raid. Time slipped fast. The sun went down, and the camp turned into a small, organized patch of light in the wild. They finished setting their new camp. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. Better than the gnolls' mess. "First watch is mine," Rock muttered. Night shifts were non-negotiable. No one trusted the shaman not to strike while they slept. They drew lots. Rock, the pugilist, got the first shift. That was when Marvin walked over and sat on a stone beside the mine tunnel. "I'll stay up with you," he said. Rock's face tightened. His eyes flicked to Marvin, uncertain, uneasy. The others also looked over, confused by the sudden offer. But Anna gave a subtle look, and most of them went to rest. Tomorrow would be worse than today. Everyone could feel it. Even if Marvin claimed he could handle the shaman, the gnoll fighters were still a threat. One-on-one, an adventurer could win. But gnolls rarely fought one-on-one. Numbers changed everything. They needed sleep. They needed strength. They needed their nerves sharp for morning. The campfire crackled and popped. Rock and Marvin sat opposite each other, the flame painting their faces with shifting orange. Rock kept studying Marvin, trying to read him. At the inn, Rock had made it clear he wanted Marvin's head. He'd been arrogant then, confident, loud. Now, staring at the man who could erase someone like Green in 3 blows, Rock felt the sting of regret like a knife in his gut. If there was a cure for stupidity, he would have swallowed a whole. But Marvin didn't even look bothered. He hadn't chosen to take watch to intimidate Rock. He'd chosen it because something about this place didn't sit right. Why didn't the gnolls camp at the tunnel mouth? He thought again. It would have been the strongest position. Most people dismissed the question. Marvin couldn't. It scratched at his memory like a hook. He'd seen this pattern before. Somewhere. He sat still, frowning, trying to drag the memory up. Nothing came, and that made him more irritated. Then, right beside his ear, he heard it. A faint sigh. Marvin's blood went cold. Not a normal sound. Not wind. Not settling earth. A system warning flashed in his mind like a blade. Fear check. The result was immediate. Thanks to the headless girl's gift, the fear washed over him and broke like water on stone. He resisted easily, and in that instant Marvin saw it. A dark shadow drifting inside the mine tunnel, just beyond the firelight. His eyes narrowed. So that's it. Understanding clicked into place with a quiet, ugly certainty. The gnolls didn't camp near the tunnel because they didn't dare. If I go in right now, I'll probably find gnoll bodies already in there. Rock across from him didn't react at all. That was normal. Rock didn't have the hearing for it. He hadn't felt the fear check. He was blind to the subtle wrongness. Marvin's lips curled slightly. It's you lot. Lucky for me. He opened his character window. Under ranger skills, he still had 46 skill points sitting unused. He didn't hesitate. He dumped 25 points straight into listen. He normally hated spending that much at once, but without hyperception, listen was one of the best survival tools a stealth class could have. The world sharpened. Tiny noises he would have missed became clear. Soft drags, wet breaths, something shifting inside stone. The battle log filled with more fear checks. Marvin passed everyone. Whatever was in that tunnel had weak fear pressure. It wasn't enough to threaten him. If anything, it made him curious. Rock blinked as Marvin suddenly stood up. "What are you doing?" Rock asked, startled. "I'm checking the tunnel," Marvin said casually. "Keep watch. Knowles might still be digging side paths. I'll be quick." It was a lie, but a useful one. Before Rock could respond, Marvin's shadow slipped away into the mine's darkness. Rock stared after him, then snorted. Going into a mine tunnel at night, not afraid of ghosts. Weird bastard. The campfire kept burning. Inside the mine, the air was damp and cold. Marvin held a torch in one hand and a dagger in the other. The flame was strong enough to push the darkness back, though it couldn't make the tunnel feel less oppressive. He moved carefully but quickly, crouching now and then to touch the soil and sniff the air, checking for drafts and movement. He was certain now there was something in this mine. When he first took over White River Valley, miners had complained about monsters. The garrison searched and found nothing. Later, strange accidents happened, but nothing fatal. People got spooked. Work slowed. Then life went on. Until today. Marvin already knew what kind of creature this felt like. He'd seen nearly every monster Feinan had to offer. But something didn't add up. They usually don't hunt people. Unless. His eyes narrowed. A corruption source. That thought made his pulse pick up. Corruption meant danger, but also meant profit. Marvin sped up. He took a turn in the tunnel, and a huge, unnatural face burst out from a hole in the rock, jaws wide, lunging straight for him. Marvin didn't flinch. He stepped back half a pace and snapped the torch forward like a spear. But the creature didn't fear fire. It opened its mouth and swallowed the torch whole. Pffffff. The flame died. Darkness slammed down. Then, all around him, pairs of dark red eyes ignited one by one. Each set of eyes belonged to another floating face in the black. Marvin lowered his center of gravity, breathing slow and controlled. With no light left, he reached into the void conch and pulled something out. "What are you doing?" "Stop." Just as Marvin was worrying that plague envoy would join in, Black Jack suddenly shouted, "He is mine." Dissatisfied, the plague envoy replied, "I only wanted to help you." "Many thanks, but no need." Black Jack sneered, "I can take care of him by myself. You had better go take care of your group of followers." The plague envoy stomped his feet angrily. He then moved toward that group of youths. A chance appeared. Marvin felt lucky. Even if he wasn't Black Jack's opponent in a one-on-one, he should be able to flee. Facing the latter's rain of attacks, Marvin began consciously dodging. He would end up in a difficult situation at every move. It looked like he would be cut down by that dagger each time, but he would always make a dangerous dodge. Furthermore, each dodge would reduce the distance to the exit. Marvin's idea was quite simple. If you're no match, then run. Even if his own dexterity was lower than Black Jack's, in this kind of complex terrain, the difference wouldn't amount to much. Without the plague envoy's obstruction, as long as he found an opportunity, he would be able to flee. He might even be able to reverse the tides and kill this guy. Marvin possessed a ring of prayers. Rainbow Jet was the strongest first circle spell and was one of Marvin's trump cards. But it was very likely that Black Jack would dodge it thanks to his high dexterity if Marvin forcefully used it in front of him. So Marvin had to find the perfect timing. Clang! A black curved dagger smashed onto the wooden floor, cutting a strand of Marvin's hair on the way. This was another close dodge. The dark murderer displayed a sinister smile. He already seemed weary of this chase. Both of his shoulders slightly adjusted. Damn it, this guy actually mastered a kind of blade technique skill. From his posture, it shouldn't be whirlwind blade. It looks like rushing thunder slash. Marvin's face became pale. This time he was really in trouble. He could withstand normal attacks. But this blade technique, with his current abilities and that common curved dagger, he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it. He clearly understood at that time. Blackjack had already seen through his intentions. This frightening guy, he knew that Marvin wanted to take advantage of the situation to flee, but he still pretended to be unaware. He was playing with his prey, destroying Marvin's confidence in one move. After all, in front of that devastating skill, even if the escape passage was close, Marvin wouldn't be able to make it. Hopeless, I presume, masked twin blades. After killing you, I'll take off your mask and finally see what you look like. Haha. While the Dark Murderer was crazily laughing, a strange light appeared on his blade. This was the sign of the use of the blade skill. Escaping was useless. Blade techniques were special skills and usually had a quite large range, especially used by a powerhouse like a Dark Murderer. If Marvin had the flicker specialty, he would have been able to dodge it. But now, the Dragon Strength effect had already ended, so those temporary stats also faded away. Marvin already had nowhere to go. He could only meet it with force. Thinking this far, he suddenly raised his curved dagger, pretending to block. But in reality, he had already begun chanting the incantation, the ring of prayers already aiming at the rushing Dark Murderer. Blade technique, rushing thunder slash. The Dark Murderer shouted out. His curved dagger was like a shadow, its tip aiming at Marvin. Rushing thunder slash had a total of 6 moves, each known for their speed. This blade technique could increase someone's attack speed 3 times. For example, if Blackjack could normally attack 5 times in 1 second, after using it, he would be able to attack 15 times in 1 second. Marvin couldn't block this sort of abnormal attack speed because he wasn't able to keep up. He could only meet force with force. He was hoping for Rainbow Jet's repel effect. This was Marvin's only chance to turn defeat into victory. This guy didn't even give Marvin time to drink medicine. He deserved being called an elite hitman of the Shadow Spider. The blade tip was like a shadow, rushing to cut down Marvin. And Marvin's Rainbow Jet was also about to be released. But at this moment, the sound of the ground being leveled echoed. A huge hole surprisingly appeared above the 2 men's head. Countless pieces of broken rocks fell, and both of their skills were forcefully canceled. Not because of the falling rocks, but because of that roll of those soft patches like a trail. He cut down 2 more small groups of earth spirits, earning another 377 EXP, and finally the tunnel opened into a deeper cavern. And there it was, the source. A plant spread across the cavern floor, thick vines snaking outward, each vine studded with sharp barbs. Marvin narrowed his eyes. A poisonous plant? The vines looked wrong. Too aggressive. Too deliberate. He leaned in, cautious. Highly poisonous plant. Its toxin was nasty, the kind that could ruin flesh fast, but it didn't seem to affect earth spirits at all. For a second, Marvin wondered if he'd followed the trail wrong. But he didn't hesitate. This was his territory. If something was growing in his mind, it was his problem to solve. And poisonous plants didn't appear without reason. Given time, this thing could mature into a true plant monster. Those creatures couldn't move, but they were tanks, terrifying constitution, and once they advanced, even fire resistance. Marvin's mind ran through possibilities. Only a few wizards cultivate plants like this, usually for experiments. Then another name surfaced, cold and ugly. The shepherds, the people who spread rot across Feinan like a hobby. His suspicion sharpened into near certainty. He built a fire on the cavern floor and fed it until the flames roared. At this stage, the vines were still young. Dangerous, yes, but not unstoppable. The fire consumed them. He could have harvested the toxin and coated his daggers, but that was suicide without an apothecary or a proper appraisal tool. One mistake, one splash, and he'd die in the dark with no one to save him. Better to burn it and live. Smoke filled the cavern. Marvin covered his mouth and swept through the ashes anyway. He had a habit from his old life. Never assume the treasure is gone just because the danger is. And that habit paid off. Under the ash, he found a chest. No lock. Marvin's eyes narrowed. So this is where the corruption really started. Inside the chest were several items, and the main culprit, a bottle lying tilted on its side, leaking a liquid that gave off a sharp, unnatural stench. Marvin sniffed once and immediately choked, coughing hard. Acid. Not normal acid. Magicalized acid. Volatile. Spreading through the air as a gas. Exactly the kind of thing that could infect low-intelligence creatures like earth spirits, twisting their behavior into violence. And the bottle didn't look like it had been tipped on purpose. Marvin searched the ashes again and found bone fragments. Burnt, brittle, hard to identify, but the shape was clear enough. Humanoid. Tall. His expression went cold. Shepherds. A shepherd really came to White River Valley. Then the pieces started fitting together. This shepherd likely tried to stash the plant and acid in the chest, bury it, poison the mind, whatever his goal was. But he died before finishing. Careless handling, injury, or both. Maybe he'd been chased and fled here. Maybe he'd already been wounded. Either way, he'd made one mistake too many, and the mind swallowed him. The bigger question remained. Why did he come here in the first place? Even with Marvin's experience, he couldn't answer it immediately. So he did what mattered now. He covered and sealed the bottle inside the chest as best as he could, stopping the fumes from spreading further. If the corruption stopped, the earth spirits would calm down in time. Then he looked at the rest of the contents. 2 more items remained. A green jade dagger and a thick envelope. Marvin's gaze locked onto the dagger first. Something about it felt clean, sharp, valuable. The original owner hadn't hidden it with obscure, so a simple inspect was enough.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Marvin couldn't help but want to mock the enchanter who added that property to this dagger. However, after thinking it over, he felt that this seemingly useless parry attribute might actually be useful depending on the situation. Along with the fact that Marvin wasn't a thief, even if he was able to keep up great offense and flexibility with a curved dagger in his right hand and a dagger in his left, it would still weaken the might of his 2-weapon fighting. As a result, Marvin could only use this dagger as a 3rd weapon. He replaced the common dagger at his waist with the Kingfisher jade dagger. At a critical time, he could let go of his curved dagger and grab this dagger to attack. This gave him a wide range of attack patterns. The only unfortunate thing was that the treasure chest hadn't given a curved dagger. If it had been an uncommon curved dagger, Marvin's fighting would have gone up 1 rank. After dealing with the problems with the territory, I must get a pair of first-rate curved daggers, Marvin thought. Dual-wielding rangers made a living through their blades, wielding a pair of common daggers all day long. Isn't that shameful? Besides the bottle and the dagger, there was still an envelope inside the chest. The envelope was sealed with wax. Well, this shepherd was already dead. After inspecting the envelope and confirming that there wasn't anything like a trap or a curse, he opened it. It contained a letter written in the shepherd's special code. Marvin searched through his noble's language mastery. But unfortunately, he found out that he wasn't able to read the shepherd-coded language. This wasn't surprising. The shepherd organization, the plague god followers, and the twin snakes of doom were all active evil forces in Feinan Continent. They had a special system and internal secret codes used for communication. And everyone who wasn't a shepherd would find it quite difficult to pierce the coded language. Their archenemy was the Northern Migratory Bird Council. This was a powerful force formed by druids, which had no lack of powerful legendary-level druids. The shepherds were sowing highly toxic seeds everywhere, seeds that agitated living creatures. This made the druids quite resentful. As people in charge of maintaining nature's harmony, they were giving their all to annihilate the shepherds. Perhaps the druids would understand shepherd language. After taking care of the loot, Marvin no longer needed to stay in the mine. After checking the surroundings 1 more time to make sure that he hadn't missed anything, he started going back toward the mine entrance. He didn't meet any earth spirits this time, but he soon found out that when he arrived, everyone at the camp was already awake and fully prepared for battle. Most of the adventurers were hiding in gaps in the walls by the mine entrance or behind obstacles in the camp. Only the White River Valley garrison members were standing behind the fortification, ready to fight. Far away in the darkness, a torch was raised. A few flickering, glowing eyes could be seen along with it. The gnolls had arrived. They came so fast. I thought it would take them at least until noon tomorrow. I didn't expect that gnoll sorcerer to be so decisive. They actually came before dawn. Marvin quietly and stealthily walked to Anna's side. He made some inquiries to understand the situation. This pack of gnolls had rushed here and just arrived. Fortunately, both rangers were on lookout at the time. One of them an archer named Joey. Joey had the same class. However, he had an innate specialty, far sight. His eyes were very sharp. He was even able to detect the stealthy gnoll scouts in the dark. It was thanks to this guy's formidable power that they were able to avoid being sneak attacked. Reportedly, there were 4 gnoll scouts stealthily approaching the camp. But Joey reacted and ruthlessly shot them down. This made Marvin have a whole new level of respect toward him. These guys had some skills indeed. He used a 6-arrow scatter shot. Of them, 4 arrows hit their targets, Anna whispered. This kind of marksmanship is rarely seen even among pure-blood elves. Marvin nodded. He didn't need Anna to say a lot, as he also knew that this kind of ability was outstanding. Also, apart from farsight, Joey definitely had another amazing specialty, or he wouldn't have been able to do that. Such a talented person, Marvin had this thought. What do we do now? After the gnoll sneak attack failed, they decided to be cautious and didn't attack again, Anna asked, whispering. She made the adventurers hide in the mine, where the gnolls couldn't see. That way they only displayed a part of their strength, the garrison team members and Joey. This was a very smart move. Roughly how many gnolls? Marvin asked. As there was no moonlight tonight, his vision was around 0. Unable to see the amount of enemies was normal. I don't know. Anna gravely shook her head. Their group only consisted of ordinary humans with no dark vision. Joey only had relied on his perception to notice the scouts, nothing more. He wasn't able to tell how many gnolls were eyeing them. It doesn't matter, we can wait. It'll be dawn soon. If I'm not wrong, this pack of gnolls will attack after dawn. We follow the original plan, said Marvin after thinking it over. After saying that, he found a bunker and took a proper rest. Why would the gnolls attack after dawn? It's simple. Their eyes were similar to those of wild wolves. In the middle of the night, they would glow with a weak green light, and humans are able to completely hide themselves in the dark. Thus, they would turn into live targets if they failed to sneak attack. They would suffer a lot more. That gnoll sorcerer wasn't a fool. On the contrary, a sorcerer able to control a tribe was usually very clever. He would certainly not waste the lives of his own subordinates. They would attack after dawn. It was the best alternative. Little had he imagined that Marvin had already set up a bigger trap. Everything went just as Marvin expected. With the failure of the sneak attack, they didn't have to worry about the gnolls attacking. They were resting and reorganizing outside the northern part of the mine. Aside from a few mutated aardwolves howling from time to time, the rest of the gnoll troop was waiting. This kind of situation was actually quite rare, because it didn't match the gnoll's characteristics. Marvin was actually quite happy about this because those always unruly gnolls being organized like this meant one thing. That gnoll sorcerer was among their formation. That guy came. Don't even think of leaving. Marvin was quite excited, even though he was still taking a nap. A first-rank ranger killing a second-rank sorcerer was actually quite challenging, let alone on a chaotic battlefield. Thinking of this made his blood boil. Even with Marvin's strength and experience, he also needed some luck. But if it actually failed, Marvin still had a way out. He had faith in his skill and strength, but he had even more faith in his brain. In Marvin's opinion, a real expert would never hesitate when fighting. Rather, he would firmly raise his weapon while having already thought several moves in advance. Marvin was definitely that kind of person. Time slowly passed by, and dawn was about to arrive. The garrison members picked up their weapons one by one and made battle preparations. They were mostly in charge of close-range battle. There were only 2 archers among them. After all, archer training had high cost, and they still needed to be born with talent. And as for expenses, arrows were quite expensive. Fortunately, Joey was also an archer. Not only did that guy have impressive shooting techniques, he could also provide a large amount of support. The gnolls in the distance began to get restless. Suddenly, 6 Aardwolves howled and broke away from the gnolls' formation, charging at the front line. A greedy one indeed. He actually wants to use Aardwolves to take care of our front line, destroying our defenses in one move. An idea popped into Marvin's head. Indeed, mutated Aardwolves' charging power was quite astonishing, but Marvin already had a way to counter that. He suddenly broke out into a sprint and shouted to Joey, "Help me find that sorcerer hiding within the pack." The battle had already started. The gnolls took the initiative to start the fight. Just as the first lights of dawn could be seen, the 6 mutated Aardwolves rushed forward. They were followed by a dense wave of gnolls. Ordinary people would feel shivers running down their spine when looking at this. Even though gnolls weren't that strong, those numbers were enough to overpower anything. Without troops from Rivershore City, it would be quite difficult to face those gnolls with only White River Valley garrison members. Everyone was hiding behind the fortifications and holding their breaths. They picked this mine entrance because it was the closest to the edge. There was a hill on the left and a forest on the right, making it relatively easy to defend. The garrison's young men were tightly clutching their weapons, ready to deal with any surprise attack coming from the gnolls. The last time they were in this situation, Marvin had ordered them to retreat due to being heavily outnumbered. But they couldn't retreat this time. This was the only way for them to get back their homes. "I need some time." Hearing masked twin blades calling for him, Joey the archer didn't make things difficult. On the contrary, he was straightforward. All veteran adventurers knew what to do in battle. Although they agreed to let Marvin handle the gnoll sorcerer, but he was only a lone ranger. If he couldn't find his target, the hiding sorcerer, the battle would turn quite troublesome. Joey was indeed quite outstanding, or else he wouldn't have been able to become famous in Rivershore City by only relying on himself. His farsight specialty wasn't only used to restrain those using stealth. It was also extremely useful for reconnaissance. Despite the lack of light, he soon found that short knoll. That peculiar short knoll was standing in the southeast hill. He had a few dozens of guards protecting him. They didn't charge with the others. They were merely standing there. As for the other gnolls, they split into 3 waves and kept a fixed distance from each other while charging toward the human camp. Seems like that gnoll knows some military tactics. Marvin thought, this guy really seems to have high intelligence. Usually, when gnolls attacked, it would be messy and disorganized, but they seemed a lot more organized under the sorcerer's orders. This wouldn't be easy to handle. Under Joey's directions, Marvin also quickly found the sorcerer. As long as he was able to kill that gnoll, the battle would become a lot more simple. But there was a problem. They were quite far from each other. Marvin was hiding in the camp, and that cunning sorcerer was quite far in the southeast hill. And he also had guards. Stealth would definitely not work. This sorcerer had the Eye of Pain, so anyone using stealth around it would be in for a lot of trouble. "Joey, help me." Marvin thought hard, and then called out to the archer. The latter straightforwardly rushed to Marvin's side. He moved very carefully and wasn't noticed by the gnolls. "I'll go kill that gnoll sorcerer. But I need your help. First we have to approach from behind. Can you use stealth?" "Never mind. We don't really need to get too close. The Eye of Pain has a range." Marvin quickly explained his battle plan. After hearing the plan, Joey thought about it for a short moment and felt it was doable. Marvin waved at Anna, and then the two used stealth and left from the eastern part of the camp. As for the front line of the battlefield, the 6 rushing mutated Aardwolves would soon reach the camp. "Is that woman, Anna, frozen in fear? The time has come, and she still hasn't called for us." Inside the mine, Kat was looking at the situation and was somewhat unable to hold back. Everyone else in the Lynx team was also restless. In their eyes, White River Valley Garrison would simply be unable to resist this assault. If they collapsed, they would also fall into a crisis. They should have been sent to kill those gnolls in one breath. Why hadn't Anna given the order yet? This made them quite puzzled. However, Gru, the other captain, was actually very calm. He kept watching the situation while holding onto his heavy sword. He only said one sentence to his restless team members. "Wait a bit more." The Bramble members immediately relaxed. After experiencing a lot of battles, they had total trust in their captain's words. Since their captain told them to wait a bit more, there was definitely no issue. But they were also quite curious. When those from White River Valley built the fortification yesterday, a few of them had disappeared for some time. What they did was unknown. How would they stop those seemingly unmatched Aardwolves? They quickly had their answer. Just as the Aardwolves were about to charge on the fortifications, Andre, who had been watching the situation, suddenly shouted, "Cut it! Slam! Slam!" A few sounds started echoing in the forest. Everyone blankly looked to the side. At that time, the reckless adventurers paid attention, unaware of when it had started. The two big trees near the mine entrance had a few ropes attached. The ropes were tied to other big trees. Andre just ordered those two garrison members hiding in the woods to cut those ropes. Snap! The two big trees began to tilt, and, surprisingly, they were falling in the direction of the battlefield. The mutated Aardwolves were startled and attempted to slow down, but their previous speed was extremely fast. How could they suddenly slow down that easily? 2 breaths later, those two big trees hit the ground with a loud sound. Rumble! Dust flew everywhere. The ground was shaking. That's why. Those 2 trees were cut down before and were only remained standing thanks to the ropes. That pack of gnolls didn't pay attention to this. Serves them right. The one who thought of this tactic is really a genius. Vern's eyes were shining while giving out praises. The other adventurers were also showing admiration. For them, getting rid of their opponent without fighting was the most beautiful thing in the world. The big trees falling down frightened the gnolls. Wails could be heard coming from the rushing mutated Aardwolf in the frontmost position, due to being flattened by those falling trees. The Aardwolf directly behind was also not able to stop on time, and his head burst open from knocking against the tree at such a speed. Unfortunately, the rest of the Aardwolves had some good luck. They managed to slow down and attempted to jump on the thick trees. But at that time, a garrison member threw a torch. The torch fell on top of the tree. The tree trunk, which was fully covered with pine grease, immediately burst in flames. 2 fire walls were formed in an instant between everyone in the camp and the gnolls. The 2 mutated Aardwolves who had jumped on the trees ended up with their fur on fire. The other 2 were scared to move forward. As for the gnolls, they were even more frightened. They didn't know what they should do. The humans, on the other hand, were full of energy due to the great victory. Anna lifted her sword and yelled, "Gru! Vern! Move in!" The 2 captains immediately rushed out from the mine. The 2 mutated Aardwolves who had jumped past the firewalls had just managed to avoid a calamity, but ended up surrounded and killed by the adventurers. The tables have turned. Outside the mine, White River Valley's garrison members' tactics of chopping down the trees and setting them on fire attracted the attention of the Gnoll sorcerer. The short and thin Gnoll sorcerer had a stunned expression on his face. He didn't think the enemy would use this kind of strategy to block his attack. He immediately roared a few times, taking advantage of his innate racial skill, communicator, to give new orders to all the gnolls. The communicator skill was a very rare innate skill. It would help the Gnoll sorcerer to issue better orders a lot faster. Ignore the firewalls. Go around. All-out attack. These were his orders. Under the Gnoll sorcerer's commands, a lot of gnolls found a path to follow and began an attempt at circumventing the wall of fire from the east side in order to attack the enemy camp. But at that time, 2 stealth people stopped 80 meters away from the hill. "Almost there," Marvin whispered. "Any closer and he might notice us. Do your best to make it work." The archer Joey silently took out his bow and said with a serious expression, "I'll do my best." The effect of the firewall was quite obvious, blocking the gnolls' attack. But this was just delaying the inevitable and wouldn't injure the gnolls. As gnolls kept pouring in from the east side gap, the pressure on the adventurers and the garrison kept rising. But the firewall at least created a relatively narrow and confined space, making the gnolls unable to swarm them. In these kinds of circumstances, humans had the advantage due to being stronger. Gru, as the captain of the Bramble team, was naturally very talented. He blocked most of the front line by himself, each swing of his great sword ending 2 or more gnolls. His strength was quite astonishing. The other adventurers were also doing their own parts. They all had their own skills. It might be hard to display on the battlefield, but this kind of small area would actually maximize their abilities. This was something Marvin had thought about. Adventurers really couldn't be used as in military troops, but they were quite efficient in small-scale encounters. Right now, for example, they didn't even need the garrison. The Lynx and the Bramble teams were able to stop the gnolls together. But this kind of resistance was only temporary, because even though the adventurers were strong, they would eventually run out of stamina. The gnolls had the numerical advantage. If there was no way to lower their morale, the human side would be defeated. You must make it. Anna pierced a gnoll's heart with her sword and cast a quick glance toward the east. Joey's movements were very slow. It was because even at this distance, quick movements might be noticed by that sorcerer. He didn't plan to sneak attack that sorcerer. That would be useless. This guy had a faint barrier around him. This kind of barrier that could alter the path of an arrow was an archer's bane, and his Eye of Pain was an assassin's nemesis. These two things made that gnoll sorcerer quite difficult to kill. To succeed, Marvin and Joey needed to have perfect coordination. Joey took a deep breath and firmly knocked an arrow on the bow. The wind was unsettled. However, the gnoll sorcerer's focus was completely locked on the battlefield. He didn't seem to have noticed the two planning a stealthy attack. Lucky, Joey aimed and finally let go of the arrow. Whoosh! Joey was exposed when the arrow shot through the air. The sorcerer's guards immediately noticed something wrong, but at that time, the arrow had already flown past them. The sorcerer was startled, stumbling back half a step, but shockingly found out that the arrow was not targeting him. On the contrary, the arrow was shot at a crooked angle and landed in front of his feet. Was that a really bad human archer? The sorcerer's guards who were startled soon began to laugh at Joey's aim. But the sorcerer suddenly let out a weird roar. He found out that there was a rope tied at the end of the arrow. The sorcerer also noticed that not far from there, roughly 60 meters away, there was a silhouette crawling on the ground. Marvin quickly recited an incantation. That seemingly ordinary rope was actually alive, detaching itself from the arrow and quickly twisting itself around the sorcerer's legs. Wishful rope. Even if it was only an uncommon item, if it was used cleverly during a battle, it could influence the outcome of the fight. The sorcerer turned pale with fear. He mumbled a spell, trying to remove the binding rope. But even though his casting speed was fast, Marvin was faster. He pulled on the rope and chanted another incantation. The rope immediately started shrinking. The sorcerer stumbled, fell on the ground, and was dragged by its legs. He arrived next to Marvin in less than 2 breaths. The gnoll guards were startled, and a loud roar could be heard. But it was already too late. Joey had a relaxed smile on his face. He drew his bow and started killing all the gnoll guards. It's over, he thought. Marvin would never be lenient when facing a prey in his hands. The gnoll sorcerer reacted fast, but not as fast as Marvin's twin daggers. A caster this close to a ranger in a fight would only have one end, death. Thump, thump, thump. 3 dagger slashes broke the sorcerer's barrier into pieces. Marvin slashed one more time with enough strength to cut the sorcerer's throat. Thud. The gnoll's neck was cut, but it sounded a bit weird. Hold on. Marvin immediately felt something wrong. This sorcerer's body. The next second, the gnoll sorcerer started turning to dust. In an instant, it turned into a gnoll-shaped earth puppet. Damn it, Marvin cursed. It's actually an earth puppet. Fucking sorcerer. This was really crafty. Marvin hadn't killed the gnoll sorcerer. This was only an earth puppet with the face of a sorcerer. The real sorcerer was still hiding among the gnolls. Joey saw this scene and was shocked. But at this time, numerous killing voices could be heard from the back of the hill. A gnoll adjutant riding a mutated aardwolf led another aggressive gnoll unit over there to kill. Their target was Marvin. We are screwed. This was what Joey thought at that moment. Joey, you go back first, Marvin yelled. He made a prompt decision at the critical moment and gave the order. Marvin was in too deep. He couldn't run away from the gnoll adjutant and his mutated aardwolf mount. But Joey was far away, If he put his all in escaping, he might be able to escape and return to the camp. The archer planned to turn away and run. Since Masked Twin Blade said so, he wouldn't stay there for no reason. The plan had failed. That Gnoll sorcerer was really too crafty. But before he ran away, he pointed at the center of that new Gnoll army. A faint flickering ray of light appeared, and suddenly a big imprint consisting of two swords crossed landed on a short Gnoll's body. That was the true Gnoll sorcerer. Joey had displayed his own strength. This mark was enough for Marvin if he still wanted to carry on with the execution. After doing that, the archer no longer hesitated and immediately fled. Only Marvin was left, alone against more than 60 Gnolls, along with 3 mutated Aardwolves and 1 sorcerer. There seemed to be trouble in the camp. The firewall was gradually weakening, and the burning fire was slowly reducing, increasing the pressure on the human group. In fact, many adventurers had paid attention to the situation when Joey shot the arrow. They shouted happily when Marvin successfully used the wishful rope to grab the Gnoll sorcerer. They thought they had already won. The Gnolls were nothing more than a pack of mobs, without their Gnoll sorcerer commanding them. They definitely won, but they hadn't expected what happened next, even though it was far away and what happened was hard to see. But Joey turning around to flee along with another Gnoll army emerging from the hill was bad news. Masked Twin Blades failed. This was what everyone thought. The Gnoll sorcerer divided his army in 2. The 2 previous attacks, reckless attacks, were nothing more than a bait. His goal was to force the human's trump card out, and he was clearly successful. The adventurers looked dispirited. They caught sight of Marvin standing alone at the bottom of the hill and facing more than 60 Gnolls. Only someone of the second rank with outstanding defensive melee abilities would have a chance of surviving this kind of siege. Ranger? Even if it was an all-rounder type of class, they were probably unable to deal with that kind of situation. Even if it was Masked Twin Blades, he would still be screwed. Vern's eyes looked everywhere, already thinking of a way to escape. This mission had failed. It wasn't that the human side was too bad. Rather, the Gnoll sorcerer was too cunning. But even if the adventurers had nearly given up, White River Valley's garrison members had yet to give up. They closely watched Marvin's back, and Andre roared on an impulse. Rush out to save him. Bramble Team's captain unexpectedly nodded. I agree. He didn't wish for anything to happen to Masked Twin Blades. If his daughter really had caught the plague, maybe even a high-level priest wouldn't be able to cure her. But at that time, Anna calmly said, out of the question. All of you defend this place. No one is allowed to set out. Everyone looked at Anna, shocked. Could she be planning on coldly watching Masked Twin Blades die in the mouth of a Gnoll? Watch closely. Anna's voice was somewhat excited. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't miss it. Marvin stood alone at the bottom of the hill. The Gnolls were just like a violently surging tide. They still hadn't rushed up to him, but he could already feel a gust of wind. If Marvin was an average person, he might have already fell to his knees, shivering. But Marvin wasn't. He stood like a strong reef inside that tide. Bang! His foot stepped on the earth puppet's head. The clay Gnoll sorcerer's head was smashed into pieces by him. Under the mask, Marvin took a deep breath. By using some incredibly fast movements, he took out an unmarked bottle in a flash. It was filled with some potion. Gulp, gulp. Marvin took a sip from the bottle in an instant. His movements were fast and hidden, so the humans standing in the camp didn't notice. They just saw Marvin tilting his head, apparently taking something out. But the Gnolls on the hill saw clearly, and they didn't care. Nothing more than a potion. What could it do? There were so many more of them, and that human, he was only a man, nothing more. The Gnoll adjutant riding on a mutated Aardwolf roared, and all the Gnolls excitedly rushed down. Using the downhill speed made them look unstoppable. Yet Marvin took out 2 daggers after taking a sip. Even though I didn't want to use it for this, it looks like I have no choice. It is fortunate that there was enough potion for 4 portions. Else it would have been a waste. Stupid and ignorant Gnolls, it's time to end this. Marvin's blood began to boil. Come on, the more the better, because more Gnolls would simply mean more corpses, nothing more. Thinking this far, he sent strength to his lower body and broke into a sprint. He looked like an arrow leaving a bow, rushing toward that Gnoll army. The human camp burst into an uproar. This guy wasn't planning to flee. He actually wanted to kill his way in. Who does he think he is? A third-rank virtuous diamond martial monk? Even second-rank fighters wouldn't dare doing that. That was a whole army of gnolls. Fighting in the battlefield was different from a duel. A random gnoll might be able to kill an expert in a war. Adventurers didn't believe in miracles. They were only convinced in what they could see with their own eyes. As for what Anna said, they totally ignored it. Masked twin blades, whose name had become famous recently, would die. This was quite a pity. "Captain, shouldn't we retreat?" A member of the Lynx team whispered, but he suddenly turned quiet, because what he saw completely shocked him. Marvin clashing with the Gnoll army wasn't what the adventurers imagined, him quickly falling from the Gnoll's numbers. But instead, he was slaughtering his way through. Marvin's actions were steady. Blood spurted when he swung his twin daggers. But what really made people speechless was that when he slashed for the first time, the heads of the first two gnolls rushing toward him flew into the air. Their heads flew. Those two gnolls weren't cut to pieces. Their corpses also flew like kites and smashed into the gnoll group, leading to chaos. An empty area appeared in the gnoll army, and Marvin himself was still kicking the ground to keep rushing forwards. He looked like a whirlwind passing through the gnoll army. The twin daggers in his hands were quickly and efficiently cutting down gnolls, harvesting their lives as if they were vegetables. Every slash killed one gnoll. He was like a demon. Gnoll swords and even arrows couldn't get within his reach. His speed and reaction had reached outrageous levels. What felt the most terrifying was his strength, which was completely crushing those gnolls. Probably only Gru was able to do something like that among the adventurers. But as a ranger, Marvin was actually able to. The adventurers were speechless. They didn't know what to say. Damn it, is he still a ranger? Vern's eyes were red, and he couldn't help but curse. This is clearly a freak. But if Marvin was next to him, he would say with a deadpan face, "This is indeed a ranger, a peerless one." At this time, if someone told Vern that masked twin blades was in fact a dragon using an advanced shape-shifting technique to turn into a human, he would definitely believe that person. Marvin shouted. His ability to combo with his twin blades reached such a level that he didn't even need to focus on it. Because every slash wouldn't just stab a gnoll to death. It would cut it and send it flying. He was close to the strength of a second-rank fighter, and his attack speed was at the level of a second-rank assassin. Indeed, these were the heaven-defying effects of dragon strength. His attribute window already quickly changed. Strength +6, reaching 17, dexterity +4, chaotic battlefield expert title added, reaching a high 25 points. 25 dexterity would give another dexterity threshold specialty, uncanny dodge. Uncanny dodge. You are so fast that you seem illusory. Archers are unable to target you. Close-range enemies accuracy -3. Don't look down on this accuracy -3. With gnolls already having low accuracy, this led to them being completely unable to hit Marvin. Marvin looked like some kind of ghost inside the gnoll army, appearing and disappearing unpredictably and reaping their lives. He looked like a true fighter, and any slash of his blade would be as simple as cutting a watermelon. But fighters didn't have such a frightening attack speed. Gru predicted that masked twin blades would have the time to attack 3 times during the time he attacked once. And only with that abnormal strength could he fight alone against 60 gnolls and a sorcerer. As the adventurers were resisting the gnolls' attack, their mind was completely focused on masked twin blade side. Anna said it would be fine, and this was a great show. A ranger was actually able to fight like that. They might not see anything like that in their whole life. They had this feeling, maybe that masked twin blades could reverse the situation with his own strength. Marvin had already killed 1/3 of the gnolls in just a minute of fighting. Over 20, dead from his efficient attacks. And Marvin himself didn't receive a single cut. This kind of achievement, no one would believe it. "Hey, Ivan, you were a ranger too, right?" A member of the Bramble team couldn't help but poke one of his teammates next to him. The latter speechlessly mumbled, "I am definitely a ranger." But are you sure that masked guy is also a ranger? Everyone remained silent. These low-level adventurers had never encountered a kind of high-end potion like dragon strength. After all, Marvin had to risk his life in the dangerous Scarlet Monastery to steal this thing. As for the garrison, they didn't think of it that much, but it did raise their morale. Masked twin blades had already led them to avenge their old lord's killer, Miller. Now, they firmly believed he could once again lead them to success. In the battlefield, Marvin was moving like the wind, even a lot faster than the mutated Aardwolves. The Gnoll sorcerer overseeing the battle was also stunned. He roared several times, and the adjutant on the mutated Aardwolf brandished a thick wooden club, gnarling his way over. Courting death? Let me first get rid of a big one. The potion lasts for 10 minutes anyway, so exterminating this pack of gnolls isn't an issue. Marvin sneered. He sprinted, his whole body looking as if he were flying. Bang! Bang! He leapt high in the air and stepped on the head of two gnolls caught by surprise, adjusting his body in a flash. This was why Marvin loved this kind of class. Once dexterity reached a high level, you could move like a wuxia character. He didn't really pay much attention to those gnoll fighters. His body was gliding in the air for a moment, when he suddenly threw something with his right hand. Wishful rope. Marvin chanted the incantation, and the wishful rope tied itself around the adjutant's right hand. Marvin gave a sharp pull. The gnoll adjutant's strength was still quite good, managing to stay stable by using the help of the mutated Aardwolf. But it didn't matter. Marvin quickly chanted another incantation, and the rope abruptly shrunk. He avoided 2 arrows and ruthlessly threw himself toward that gnoll adjutant. The adjutant was also decisive. His right hand was bound by the wishful rope, so he released the reins with his left hand and took out a dagger from his waist before ruthlessly thrusting it toward Marvin. The gnoll adjutant's reaction time was faster than an ordinary person's by a whole level, but Marvin's was even faster. After transmigrating, Marvin's biggest advantage compared to the other class holders was his control over his body. An extremely tough soul that made him aware of every inch of his body. He could adjust his body as he wished by quickly exercising control over it. Even though those minute adjustments used up a lot of stamina and might cause minor injuries to his muscles and bones, there was no time to hesitate in a fight. He tugged on the wishful rope, leaning his body backward, his legs abruptly coiling around the gnoll adjutant's left hand. Bang! The dagger fell to the ground. Marvin quickly thrusted his twin daggers in the Aardwolf's back, between the ribs. Roar! The Aardwolf suddenly let out a painful roar, his whole body violently twitching. The gnoll adjutant turned pale with fright and lost his balance. Marvin stood on both daggers, his left hand quickly reaching to his waist, drawing the Kingfisher Jade dagger. Whoosh! As fast as lightning. Cutthroat. Using Cutthroat from the front would definitely lower the success rate of the skill. The gnoll adjutant tried his best to dodge it. He moved his head, trying to let the small amount of armor on his neck block the blow. But it was no use. The Kingfisher Jade dagger's armor break skill, with its powerful armor penetration strength, made the dagger directly cut through that small steel section covering his throat. Blood flew everywhere. The gnoll adjutant's carotid artery was cut open, and much of the blood was sprayed on Marvin. He looked like a devil, one foot trampling the corpse of the gnoll adjutant, and the other on the squirming Aardwolf. Whoa! An extremely vicious mutated Aardwolf was actually whimpering. It was completely subdued by Marvin's aura. For humans with their relatively low perception, aura might be something ethereal. But monsters could distinguish if someone was powerful thanks to their keen instincts. The Aardwolf wasn't just scared by Marvin's terrifying strength. He actually laid down on the ground. Marvin ruthlessly pulled his twin daggers from the Aardwolf's ribs and then put a dagger away. The body shivered and then twitched to death. A large empty area appeared around the Aardwolf's dead body. All the gnolls were retreating. They surrounded Marvin in the center while closely clenching their weapons. But their eyes were filled with fear. The gnolls' morale already reached an extremely low point, and they broke into an uproar. Marvin's incredible fighting strength made them afraid. The The Gnoll Adjutant was only second to the Gnoll Sorcerer in the Gnoll tribe. His death in battle gave a large blow to the Gnolls. Normally, if something like this happened during a battle, most of the Gnolls would flee. Those fickle things were unreliable. However, these Gnolls didn't run this time, because they had a leader, the Gnoll Sorcerer. White River Valley will be back on foot as long as that Gnoll Sorcerer is eliminated. That Gnoll Sorcerer is very sly, but he already used an earth puppet, so this is definitely his real body this time. Not only do sorcerers have a much lower mana pool than wizards, but this one trains so many mutated Aardwolves. This is definitely some kind of blood magic. Marvin grasped his twin daggers, coldly looking at the angry Gnoll Sorcerer in the pack of Gnolls. The other side was also staring at him, unwavering. Eye of Pain, Earth Puppet, Mutated Aardwolf, Taming. This guy shouldn't have many more powerful skills. Marvin made a very clear estimation. According to the results of his Inspect skill, this guy was a level 6 sorcerer. He had just reached 2nd rank. A Gnoll Sorcerer's charisma shouldn't be too high. Marvin estimated that his opponent shouldn't have learnt more than 3 powerful spells. As for the basic spells, Marvin wasn't worried. After thinking this far, Marvin burst into a sprint, aiming at that Gnoll Sorcerer. The Gnoll Sorcerer truly didn't have more second circle spells. As a level 6 sorcerer, he was able to learn second circle spells, but he learned Earth Puppet and Wild Animal Taming. These 2 second circle spells had no real attacking power, but they were quite good for developing a tribe. But his fighting strength was actually really bad. He already began panicking when Marvin charged toward him. He kept using his communicator skill to force other Gnolls to block the path, but he decided to flee for a reason. His stats were really bad and his legs were short. He wouldn't be able to run away from this killing god. His only plan was to hide in the crowd and try to use a first circle magic to kill this ranger. But unfortunately, this plan was doomed to fail, because before Joey the Archer had fled, he put an eye-catching mark on top of the Gnoll Sorcerer. This mark was stuck on his head. He couldn't lift it. Marvin was thankful for this mark, or he would have had to go through all those Gnolls to find that Gnoll Sorcerer. The sorcerer was quite short after all. If he crouched, how could he be seen? But with the mark showing the way, Marvin moved with an imposing god-slaying, Buddha-slaughtering aura. More than 10 Gnolls would die in an instant. Finally, he dashed in front of the Gnoll Sorcerer. There weren't many Gnolls left blocking in front of the sorcerer now. Facing Marvin's frightening killing efficiency, the Gnoll troops seemed to fall apart for the first time. Although the Gnoll Sorcerer ordered them using Communicator, they still remained still, because Marvin already caused them to be under fear. The Gnoll Sorcerer snarled. He suddenly extended his right hand and pointed toward Marvin. But unexpectedly, Marvin, who had been sprinting all along, suddenly slowed down. He dodged to the side with a roll, as if he had already expected the sorcerer's move. A claw of ice shot up from the ground, at Marvin's original position, hitting nothing. The sorcerer's casting speed was fast, especially for a first circle spell. This hand-shaped ice spike was effective for sneak attacks, quick and ruthless, and also adding a freeze effect. This was the favorite spell of many casters. Ordinary people would usually find it difficult to dodge, but this masked person had managed to. The Gnoll Sorcerer shivered. This human was really too abnormal. The first rank estimated by his Inspect was definitely wrong. That was definitely a 2nd rank powerhouse, close to 3rd rank. But what could he do now? He could only brace himself and keep using his remaining first circle spells. But in reality, Marvin's roll was a fluke. Luckily, he had lowered his speed, because even though his dexterity was really high, his perception stayed the same, so he hadn't predicted this ice claw. The reason he slowed down was because he suddenly found out that his twin daggers were bent. Those damned common weapons. Feinan didn't have a durability stats, but weapons and items would progressively wear down due to daily use. If they weren't properly maintained, they could turn completely worthless. Those curved daggers weren't anything good to begin with, as Marvin had found them barely good enough to cut down people. But during that charge, Marvin killed a great deal of Gnolls. His curved daggers in his hands bent out of shape due to being unable to bear Marvin's tyrannical moves. He had planned to slow down and quickly switch weapons. He unexpectedly sensed something fishy in front of him after slowing down. So he then rolled and avoided the claw-shaped spike. "Lucky, lucky," Marvin whispered. Luck was also very important in a fight. He took advantage of the roll to ruthlessly throw the two bent daggers toward the Gnoll's sorcerer. Marvin didn't focus on the accuracy, but he scared the Gnoll's sorcerer into jumping. He thought it was a throwing knife technique and actually used a leap to dodge it. But when he noticed that the two curved daggers were only something Marvin had discarded before taking two spare common curved daggers from his void conch, he nearly fainted. Everyone in the camp was speechless. Why did he switch daggers? The adventurers were hesitating. Gru used sweep on 3 harassing gnolls before taking a quick glance and said, unsure, "Maybe the blades broke?" They were all doubtful. An expert like Mass Twin Blades would definitely not use common daggers. How could they have been broken? But they didn't have time to find the answer, since Marvin had already arrived less than 10 steps away from the sorcerer. The Gnoll's sorcerer clenched his teeth and took a step forward, spreading both hands. A big mass of green liquid took shape in the sky. An acid spray spell. Even if a magic like acid spray was only a first circle magic, it still inflicted a lot of negative effects. Skin would blister so much that it would putrefy. If it got in the eyes, it could even make someone permanently blind. This was a caster's horrifying strength. Even if it was a first circle spell, it still had quite a bit of firepower. But Marvin was already prepared for it. At low level, acid spray was the second favorite spell of sorcerers and wizards, the first being Circle of Ice. Marvin tilted his body and simply rolled away, dodging the acid spray. Bang! As he evaded, he stunned a gnoll standing nearby with the handle of the dagger, sheathed it, grabbed the gnoll, and held it in front of him while he ran toward the sorcerer. The gnoll's sorcerer was really panicking this time. Marvin's actions were quite obvious, using that gnoll as a shield. An arcane missile flew toward them. Bang! Marvin swiftly threw the gnoll at the arcane missile to block it. Marvin suddenly sped up, reaching a ghost-like speed, and finally reached the sorcerer. Cutthroat. Even though the gnoll's sorcerer was wearing a low-level mana armor, it would directly crumble in front of the powerful Cutthroat. This move fiercely sliced the sorcerer's head due to Marvin's 17 strength. It was like a hoe in a vegetable field. The gnoll sorcerer's neck was missing a part, from which blood was spurting. The gnolls in the surroundings were thoroughly stunned. Their leader died like that, though they'd all had a faint premonition when Marvin charged to the sorcerer. But when it became reality, they still received quite a bit of shock. Even a pack of dragons without a leader would turn chaotic, let alone a pack of gnolls. As for the human side, they burst into a loud cheer. The archer Joey was also displaying a proud expression. After all, without his mark, Marvin wouldn't have killed that gnoll sorcerer that easily. He also contributed to this. The next instant, a bloody Marvin revealed 2 daggers. He didn't wait and kept fighting, thoroughly taking care of the remaining gnolls. They began to scatter and flee toward the castle, frightened. Still 1 minute of dragon strength left. Can't miss this pack of EXP. Marvin had never been soft-hearted. He roared and started swinging his daggers. These gnolls were thoroughly defeated. The gnolls in the camp also turned into a mess. They began to flee and throw their armor and helmets away. "We chase," Anna decisively ordered. Now is the time. They had to take advantage of the gnolls fleeing to pursue and behead a few more. Andre roared, and all White River Valley garrison members took the lead in chasing after them. Then the adventurers followed. They didn't really mind something like chasing gnolls. In any case, these things had already turned into headless chickens. Their morale was pitifully low, and their resistance was merely a front. They were only waving their weapons in panic. Even though there was a huge difference in numbers, a massacre had already begun. Of course, even if this side of the battlefield was a slaughter, they didn't have Marvin there. The adventurers and the garrison all saw Marvin chasing more than 30 screaming gnolls alone. His speed was frightening. and the short-legged gnolls couldn't outrun him. Dagger rising, dagger plunging, repeating the same action over and over again. Corpses were spread across the hill a few minutes after. Not one escaped. They all became dead bodies. This was masked twin Blade's strength. They were all deeply shocked. He stood alone on top of the hill, motionless. They couldn't clearly see his expression, but the eyes of all those onlookers were full of reverence. It was thanks to his strength that they turned the battle around. He first killed his way into the army and created an empty spot inside. He then beheaded the Gnoll adjutant. Finally, he took advantage of the chaos to forcefully eliminate the Gnoll sorcerer. This achievement was amazing enough. Such an abnormal guy. That young White River Valley noble definitely can't invite this kind of powerhouse. Looks like masked twin blades didn't trick me. That guy really has someone more powerful behind him. Cat was killing gnolls on the side, absent-mindedly looking at masked twin blades. He was suddenly deeply worried, because just 2 days ago, he had stealthily sent a carrier pigeon. That pigeon flew toward Rivershore City. If he didn't get the time wrong, that person should have sent people over. I hope it's a second-rank class holder, at least 2 of them, or more. Otherwise, Cat would really feel frightened. Masked Twin Blades was quite fierce. He wouldn't overreach himself, right? But things already reached this point. He also didn't have any other way. Since he had already sided with that person, he had to take some risks. Being an adventurer for a lifetime was definitely not his goal. The majority of the Gnoll fighters were soon killed by the humans. The Gnolls became defenseless when they started fleeing. They weren't particularly fast, so only a few Gnolls managed to escape. As the war completely settled, White River Valley's recovery was a success. Under Anna's orders, everyone took a quick rest and burnt the Gnoll corpses. They then kept moving toward the castle. Most of the Gnolls inside the castle didn't have any fighting ability. They were all elderly or young. Their fighters had already been cleanly eliminated, and their leader had already been beheaded by Marvin. This only left them with one end: death. This world was this ruthless. In wars between races, they wouldn't leave any seed behind. Even if it was a newborn, they would also cut off its neck. This was even more of a massacre than the earlier pursuits. It was already common for the adventurers. As for the garrison, they had been living in Feinan world since they were born, so they naturally knew this kind of rule. Moreover, the Gnoll invasion had also caused a lot of civilian casualties. They had no reason to show mercy. More than 200 Gnolls were tied up before being slaughtered. Their corpses were piled up on the hill and completely burnt in a raging fire in the middle of the night. There were still some embers left the next morning. We won. We made it. We are home. Standing on the castle walls, the White River Valley garrison members were crying tears of joy. Even if the castle and the surrounding farmhouses were still deserted, they knew that those civilians that left to take refuge in the mountain would soon return after their lord called. White River Valley would definitely recover its past glory. The adventurers rested for the night and were also full of vitality. They stood on the walls, enjoying the morning breeze. Anna just settled their commission, and there were no casualties. This mission was really worth it. The reward of a mission with no casualties would normally be quite average. But the casualties of this mission had disappeared thanks to masked twin blades. The most serious injury was a White River Valley garrison member who had gotten a sprain because he was too excited when he chased and stepped on a Gnoll head. The rest was slight pulled muscles, bruises, and other such things. This kind of enjoyable task, with large rewards and not too dangerous battle, adventurers wouldn't see them often. Many thanks for helping us. Anna emotionlessly said to the adventurers, I now formally announce that everyone has fulfilled their duty. You can leave at any time. We will of course welcome you, should you wish to stay. But you'll have to comply with White River Valley rules. The 3 solo adventurers left after receiving their money, as they had no interest in White River Valley. As for the 2 teams, they stayed. Cat squinted, looking in the distance, apparently waiting for something. Soon, a few shadows appeared in the distance. It was a few knights. Where are those knights coming from? Anna frowned. Andre, got it. Andre gave a meaningful glance to one of the garrison members. The latter immediately drew a bow, swiftly aimed at those oncoming knights and shot 3 arrows. These guys had quite ordinary shooting skills, not as good as Joey's when it came to long range, but it was still useful as a warning. Sure enough, due to the warning arrows, the 3 knights slowed down and slowly arrived at the bottom of the castle's hill. One knight among them walked in front and loudly yelled, "We are Rivershore City's disciplinary knights. We have come to catch the wanted criminal, masked twin blades. We hope that everyone would not obstruct us from carrying out the law." Arresting masked twin blades? The few knights' words created a commotion on the walls. Rivershore City actually dispatched disciplinary knights? Wasn't this too ridiculous? Disciplinary knights were troops directly under the wizard regiment's chief. They were tougher than the patrols. Rivershore City's disciplinary knights troop didn't have more than 20 members, but every single one of them was a peak second-rank expert. Dispatching 3 of those? This was definitely not to arrest an evil follower. All the members of the Bramble team were shocked. Gru was staring at Cat. The latter was calm. He was sneering inwardly. While masked twin blades was threatening him, of course he would listen. But despite masked twin blades' backing, he also had the backing of that person in some way, and his position was quite high. He was ready to gamble. He obviously didn't want to participate in the intrigues of the upper layer of Rivershore City, but giving information could lead to a huge reward. Why shouldn't he do it? As for masked twin blades' retaliation, such a joke. Masked twin blades was quite strong, but he still hoped to escape 3 disciplinary knights? Surely not. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but show a complacent expression. His eyes suddenly twitched. What about masked twin blades? He was just standing there. How did he suddenly disappear? Not waiting for Cat's reaction, a weak but firm voice echoed from the depth of the castle. Disciplinary knights? Are the disciplinary knights free right now? When my White River Valley was occupied by the gnolls, where were you? Where did your oath of loyalty toward the Wizard Alliance go? White River Valley is my territory. You trespassed into my territory and still think of capturing someone? This is a grave violation of the Wizard Alliance regulations. Your actions have already seriously offended me. I don't know who urged you to do this, but I'll now ask you this. Get the fuck out of my territory. Words kept pouring, each one harsher than the previous. A pale, thin, and weak youth appeared on the castle walls. He looked like he was recovering from serious illness. It felt like a gust of wind could blast him off the walls. However, he was standing perfectly straight. The 3 knights below could clearly hear his loud and clear voice. Their faces changed. "My lord, my lord, my lord, when did you come back?" The garrison members immediately rushed over. They thought Marvin was still in Rivershore City, waiting for their good news. They didn't expect that Marvin had already arrived inside the castle. Cat looked at Marvin, who just arrived, cursing his bad luck. This young noble is smart. He should have been following us all along. He probably entered the castle yesterday night, covered by Anna and the others. As for masked twin blades, he likely had been told to escape. "I'm done for." Vern covered his head. A swift mind like his already knew what would happen next. Marvin was indeed a destitute noble, but nobility was still nobility. In Rivershore City, he became penniless due to losing his territory. Even gangs and casino dared to bully him. The city hall dared to fool him because of this too. Unable to keep your own territory, even if you were a noble, so what? Rivershore City isn't your territory. You have no authority here. But it was different in White River Valley. This was Marvin's territory. Marvin had the most authority in this land. This power was bestowed upon him by the Wizard Alliance. Any attempt at challenging the Overlord's decisions would be a provocation toward the South Wizard Alliance. No one would dare to do something like this. Even those disciplinary knights with extremely high status in Rivershore City wouldn't dare to. White River Valley and Rivershore City had no relation with each other. White River Valley was completely independent. Even if it was a warrant from Rivershore City's lord, Marvin could choose to ignore it, because this territory belonged to his grandfather, a hard-working high-level wizard. The South Wizard Alliance would safeguard Marvin's power. Because of the wizard's supreme rule, At least for now, not many people dare to take risks for a bit of benefit. The 3 disciplinary knights immediately turned flabbergasted. Their backer seemed to have underestimated White River Valley's young baron. The latter was not only not as weak as the stories said, he was also quite unyielding. Their group rushing in without Marvin's permission was definitely an offense to avoid. Want to arrest someone in White River Valley? Without Marvin's permission, it was simply impossible. The 3 men looked at each other in dismay, somewhat angry. But they had no other way. Even if the castle gates were closed, they could still use their strength and kill their way in. Furthermore, they could act together with the Lynx team. But they didn't dare. This was an overlord's dignity. It came from the era of wizard supremacy. Since the calamity had yet to come, Marvin could definitely scare people using his connections. The 3 disciplinary knights were silent for a moment before one of them yelled, "Baron Marvin, Mass Twin Blades is a very dangerous criminal." He was forcefully interrupted by Marvin. "I haven't seen the official warrant from Rivershore City Hall. I only saw an anonymous warrant in the major guilds. This kind of warrant, as long as they were wealthy, anyone could do it, right? As I see it, Sir Mass Twin Blades has earned the hatred of a very wealthy family. But I don't care about these kinds of things. You can look for Mass Twin Blades elsewhere if you want to catch him. This is my territory. He is welcomed like any civilian, craftsman, or merchant." Stopping there, Marvin feigned a severe coughing fit, and then added in a strict tone, "Leave. We just cleared the knolls, and quite a lot of work is left to be dealt with. While I was at my worst, Rivershore City didn't give me any help. So, from now on, White River Valley will not welcome any official from Rivershore City." Those words shocked everyone. Even Anna was startled. Marvin's sentence was akin to breaking off diplomatic ties with Rivershore City. This wasn't a joke. Never mind the rest of the things. But when it came to food, White River Valley would buy from Rivershore City every year. How would they solve the food issue after breaking off diplomatic ties? How would they solve the trade issue? This was a huge issue. "Lord," Anna wanted to say something. Marvin waved his hand, pretending to be quite angry. "I already made my decision. I'll go rest now. If those 3 knights aren't willing to leave, I can use the 9th month medal to ask for a wizard alliance as arbiter." He silently left after saying this. Everyone on the wall was left dumbstruck. The adventurers all showed different expressions. Gru was actually relaxed. He bet that Masked Twin Blades should be in the castle. With Baron Marvin's unyielding attitude, those 3 disciplinary knights didn't dare to break in. Sure enough, after hearing that Marvin was willing to use the 9th month medal, their faces immediately turned dark. They left without saying a word. They had no way. They could only report this. Those 3 knights were burning in anger. They had originally thought that it would be a piece of cake, but they didn't expect this young noble to actually be this tough. They hadn't expected this kind of outcome at all. But now that they thought about it, it seemed like this young noble had been quite bullied in Rivershore City. Loathing the law enforcement and falling out wasn't surprising at all. Since our mission has already been completed, our team should also depart. Vern had an ugly look on his face as he saw Anna smile. He didn't know whether Masked Twin Blades had already noticed him leaking information, but staying in the castle was clearly not a good idea. Hurrying back to Rivershore City was good. If I was really noticed by Masked Twin Blades. Thinking of this, Vern felt something cold on his back. He clearly saw Marvin fight 60 gnolls and 1 shaman by himself yesterday. Even if his team was well-equipped and tough, it wasn't worth mentioning when compared with Marvin. Of course, he didn't expect that Marvin had actually taken a potion. He thought that Marvin had been hiding his strength. "Of course, you are welcome to come back to White River Valley as a guest." Anna lightly smiled, immediately releasing the Lynx team. This was Marvin's idea. Even though she didn't know much about young Master Marvin's plan, she still did as she was told. In any case, ever since that serious illness, young Master Marvin hadn't made any bad decisions. The Lynx group left the castle. Night arrived, and the castle looked somewhat cold and desolate. After all, besides the garrison, there were only a few people. Most of the territory's inhabitants were still in the countryside. Anna would send people early tomorrow to request those inhabitants to come back. At that time, the reconstruction of White River Valley would start. However, inside Marvin's study in the middle of the night, Bramble Team's Captain Gru was restlessly and worriedly sitting in front of a desk. An extremely thin and weak-looking Marvin feigned surprise. "Is what you said true?" Sir Mass Twin Blades already left. "He said that the way to solve your daughter's plague is in my study." Gru nodded heavily. Mass Twin Blades had said those things. He remembered quite clearly. "Ah, that's great. I'll look through those books to see if by any chance there is something about a dark sweet poison." "You shouldn't worry. According to your statement, your daughter still has some time. I hope that I'll be able to find the relevant book during that time." "Thank you for this, Sir Baron." Gru had a grateful look. He left the room. After a moment, Anna walked in from a side door and faintly asked, "Why not cure his daughter?" Marvin quietly smiled. "I will. But not now." It was obviously not the time. The dark sweet poison was the plague god's experiment. Curing it too early would attract the attention of the plague god. Marvin didn't fear the gods, but he would also not brainlessly turn this into an antagonistic situation, especially now that he had a lot on his hands. First, he had to solve the food shortage issue. Early morning, in the dense forest next to the castle, a figure was traveling back and forth in the forest. Whoosh! Shadows swiftly flew out from Marvin's hands. Tough! All the shadows hit the circles on the great trees in the dense forest. But while some were relatively accurate, some were on the edge of the circles. Marvin stopped after throwing a set of dart in one breath and meticulously looked at the battle logs. Even though dart is the easiest hidden weapon to master, my accuracy is still a little low. Accuracy is a bit tied to strength. Even if my dexterity is quite good, I've seldom used long-range weapons. All hidden weapons take some training to be able to be used effectively, but I should be able to reach 30 SP if I keep at it for a while. Marvin silently looked at hidden weapons, Dart 24, in his skill list and was somewhat speechless. The most valuable thing he gained from the Scarlet Monastery was definitely that dragon strength potion. But this introduction to hidden weapons was actually pretty good. Marvin learned 3 hidden weapon skills from it. The 3 skills were Hidden Weapons Dart 24, Hidden Weapons Throwing Knife 5, Hidden Weapons Flying Needle 5. Aside from the darts, Marvin would lose some accuracy with the other hidden weapons, even if he used the skill. This was the result of Marvin using the noble skill Quick Study. His hidden weapon talent was quite average, so he picked the easiest to learn. Because he was reluctant to use his valuable skill points on hidden weapons, Marvin insisted on training his dart skill every morning. 30 sets of 20 darts every day. 20 sets in the morning and 10 in the evening. Marvin's dart skill rose quite fast due to the intensity and amount of time he spent on it. After all, he already had a good dexterity base. But in the end, hidden weapons were long-range offensive weapons, and he wasn't making a lot of progress on accuracy. For someone like Marvin, who was fond of one strike, one kill, he wasn't really satisfied with that. Apart from practicing darts, Marvin's strength also increased from the great amount of gnolls killed during the expedition. During the battle to recover White River Valley, Marvin got 2194 battle EXP, the Earth Spirits included. He had already reached Ranger level 5 and met the conditions to advance. But to reach level 6 Ranger, he needed 4,800 EXP. It was quite clear that the gnolls couldn't meet his advancement needs. So he thought about it for a while and decided to put 1,000 battle EXP into Shadow Steps. It was the same as Cutthroat. Due to Marvin repeatedly using the action in battle, he could use battle experience to turn it into a personal skill. Shadow Steps and Cutthroat formed the Phantom Assassin's signature combo, second only to Desperate Strike. After Marvin used 1,000 EXP, a new skill appeared in his skill list. Shadow Steps 30. Shadow Steps not being as high as Cutthroat was quite normal. Even though Marvin had practiced this kind of footwork when he was playing the game, it wasn't done as accurately as Cutthroat, so it was impossible to completely emulate it. But 30 points in Shadow Steps was enough to use it. Now Marvin was completely able to use Stealth or Hide, plus Shadow Steps, plus Cutthroat, a powerful assassination skill. These skills made his assassination abilities not at all inferior to the assassin path of the thieves, and his melee abilities were a lot stronger than ordinary rangers. Coupled with his battle experience, even without Dragon Strength Potion, Marvin had confidence in fighting any second-rank expert. Tough, tough, tough. Darts kept flying out. Time quickly passed, and all the darts in his hands had soon been all thrown. Numerous darts were stuck on circles on the surrounding big trees. This was today's final round of training. Marvin picked up all the darts and then ran in the castle from side door. It was 4 days after White River Valley recovery. Just as Marvin expected, the disciplinary knights that were sent away didn't come back to look for trouble, and the people harboring evil intentions were apparently also shocked by Marvin's boldness. There were no signs of movement from them for the time being. Marvin knew that even if they had plans, they could only set them up secretly. This was the era before the Great Calamity, the era of the Wizard Alliance. Aside from guarding for a possible assassination, the rest wouldn't be a problem. And after those gnolls were thoroughly expelled, White River Valley gradually began to regain its past atmosphere. Anna led half the garrison, and they worked tirelessly, visiting each house in Green Village, Fog Village, Coiling Water Lake, and other places. They invited those civilians who had fled, terrified from the gnolls, to come back. The village at the bottom of the castle town gradually became thriving with people again. All the originally abandoned farmhouses were once again cleanly put in order, and the farmers began to come back. Craftsmen and artisans took their children back to the castle town. The current White River Valley was no different from the other territories. The core was naturally the Overlord and the Overlord's people. Marvin and Anna lived in the deepest part of the castle, with garrison members guarding the outside. Also, all kinds of craftsmen and artisans lived outside the castle, in the city. They groomed their children as apprentices, and they would inherit their parents' occupations and become tailors or maybe masons. Farmers were outside the walls. There were also some peddlers, but these sly guys would often be thieves. Looking at it from above, Marvin's castle town was surrounded by cliffs with a grove on the side. There was a lone rock bridge in the south with a man-made canal below. The canal drew water from the White River. The water was quite deep, and some pikes were placed inside, pointing up. Anyone that fell in would definitely not have a good end. Farmhouses were at the bottom of the castle town. The farmhouses spread apart from each other were still considered as just starting. It was quite difficult to grow crops in the vast stretches of barren soil, except wheat or maybe ochre superscript 1. The White River in the distance was just like a belt flowing through the White River Valley, this vast yet unfertile land. The northern mine could still be seen from the top of the castle town walls. The White River Valley curled around the west of the northern mine, and it had an abandoned wharf. This was White River Valley, an unfertile rural territory, but Marvin still had to protect it with his life. The sun slowly rose as people began their work. Fortunately, Marvin managed to drive out the gnolls on time, or he would have delayed the summer cultivation. If that happened, the already awful food shortage would have turned even worse. It's time to work. Marvin ate breakfast, changed, and returned to his study. Anna was already there waiting. After successfully recovering White River Valley, Marvin had fulfilled the youth's wish, and the last fragment of soul dissipated. But his oath to the youth hadn't changed. He would guard this place. He was totally confident in his ability to do this. After accepting the 1,000 General EXP, his quest menu turned empty. This made Marvin somewhat surprised, but it wasn't the most important thing right now. The food shortage? I can settle this issue, Marvin softly said to the anxious Anna. He was discussing the territory situation with Anna while skillfully writing a decree with his quill. There were too many documents that need to be handled for the reconstruction of the White River Valley. But Marvin was dealing with it smoothly. Even if he wasn't someone working in administration in his previous life, he was quite smart. The small White River Valley still had to deal with crooked and no-good travelers. He released 5 Overlord decrees in one breath. First decree, White River Valley's Garrison Recruitment Decree. Any man of age in any village in White River Valley may enlist in the garrison. This would mainly be overseen by Andre. Marvin intended to enlarge the garrison. 20 men were indeed too few. For the 2,000 people in White River Valley, the garrison needed at least 50 people. Marvin wasn't lacking in funds. He had brought out enough money from the inner area of the Scarlet Monastery to provide for the garrison for many years. Second decree. It encouraged the inhabitants to raise livestock. Marvin found out that White River Valley South pasture fields were especially fitting to herd livestock. It had not been developed in the past due to the threat of gnolls and wild animals. Now, with Marvin increasing his territory's military force, this should be able to safeguard it. Every household herding livestock would have a certain allowance. Third decree. Recruiting artisans, craftsmen, and merchants. They would give energy to the territory. Fourth decree. Also a recruitment decree, but it was for class holders, especially those who had army experience. Marvin needed some people with leadership experience or adventuring experience to lead the new garrison members. This recruiting decree gave out some generous rewards and even made Gru and the others interested. Fifth decree. It was a repair decree. Marvin hoped for the farmers and some craftsmen to send some people to repair White River Valley's abandoned wharf. This was a time-consuming and large-scale engineering project, and I thought it was unwise. But Marvin had his own reasons. Under his urging, the 5 decrees were issued. White River Valley was shocked for a while. The Overlord hasn't taken this many actions in a row for quite a long time. This was a very inspiring feeling. Marvin could feel the change. The next day, when he stood on the wall, watching the faces of the people coming and going, he could feel some kind of energetic atmosphere. This made him feel especially satisfied. This was a completely different kind of achievement from dealing a killing blow. A flute's melody could suddenly be heard in the distance. Marvin focused on it. The tune came from the windmill of the former Castletown bakery. The melody was quite familiar. Marvin recalled this song name from his deepest memories. White River Valley Awakening. The fragrant aroma coming from the bakery, the distant crystalline and silvery river. Marvin took a deep breath. So beautiful. But suddenly, rushed footsteps could be heard behind him. Anna's anxious voice also followed. Young Master Marvin. Something bad happened. Young Master Wayne was cursed by someone in Magor Academy. He is now bedridden and unconscious. Marvin turned around, clenching his fists. The old butler had sent a letter, informing them that Marvin's younger brother Wayne had a hard-to-remove curse. Even Magor Academy's great wizards were helpless. There weren't much news on the letter, but fortunately, the old butler who followed Wayne to Magor Academy precisely described Wayne's condition. Twin Snake's cult's skill. Upon reading the few details, Marvin had more or less figured out what happened. The Twin Snake's cultists were actually that fierce. They dared to extend their grip to the 3 Ring Towers area. Wayne's location, the Magor Academy, was part of the 3 Ring Tower. It was safe to say that it was East Coast's safest area, or so Marvin had thought. He hadn't expected a problem to happen at his brother's location just as he recovered his territory. This was something unforeseen by Marvin. Why would a Twin Snake's follower put his hand on Wayne? Could it be that the Patriarch saw me? Surely not. I definitely dug out Miller's eyes before killing him. Marvin quickly denied this line of thinking. According to the old butler's statement, Wayne was apparently in the middle of preparing for a very important competition. In the 3 Ring Towers area, the 3 Wizard Towers academies would compete against each other. It seemed that recently, the 3 high-level Wizard Towers joined hands to hold a real combat competition for the first time. They divided their disciples into a few different levels and let them fight. Even though Marvin's younger brother was quite young and had joined the academy not that long ago, he still displayed fairly outstanding magical talent. With talent like his grandfather's, as long as Wayne diligently studied, becoming a second-rank wizard wouldn't be an issue. He might even reach the threshold of a 3rd-rank wizard. This kind of talent in the 3 Ring Towers was considered quite good, especially in the weakest Magor Academy. And it was said that this guy had an unusual battle wizard specialty. Thus, under his teacher's recommendation, he would participate in the upcoming selections for the competition. Wayne's performance was very impressive. He surmounted all the obstacles, finally reaching the last round. But on the eve of the selection, this 9-year-old child suddenly fell sick. This was clearly a setup. Magore's teachers did their best, but could only delay Wayne's curse. He still remained unconscious and clearly couldn't proceed with the competition. The one who benefited the most from Wayne's coma was obviously his opponent, a wizard named White. Magore's teachers couldn't catch White. This guy apparently had powerful backing. Although there were suspicions, there was no conclusive evidence. They couldn't do anything about it. Indeed, divination spells already lost their effectiveness. Marvin carefully read the letter, not wanting to miss any details. There was at least a third-ranked diviner among Magore's teachers. However, they were powerless. It was quite obvious that divinations had already stopped working, or a truth recollection would have been enough to catch the culprit. Wizards had gradually begun to display powerlessness. Next, the other schools of magic would also begin to weaken and the wizards' rule would slowly waver. After all, they were about to face gods that were a lot more powerful. "Young Master Marvin, let me go," Anna said spontaneously. Marvin shook his head. This matter wasn't that simple. Wayne remaining unconscious like this was similar to the effects of a twin snake's follower's methods. The average person, even wizards, were unclear about the twin snake's techniques due to not having fought them for years. After all, curses were the most troublesome. Want to remove the curse? You just had to remove the curse's source. Magore's Academy didn't have an expert able to do that, unless she is willing to take care of it. But this is clearly impossible. Marvin silently thought. Magore's Academy was affiliated to the Rainbow Tower's master, a wizard close to reaching the legend rank, Hathaway. It was said that she was the wizard with the highest chance of rising to the legend rank in the South Wizard Alliance. Marvin clearly remembered that during the game, this woman had successfully ranked up before the Great Calamity, luckily avoiding that split second of severe damage caused by the universe magic pool exploding. She was one of the few legend-level wizards active after the Great Calamity. Sadly, she was killed by a god 1 year after the Calamity. It seemed it was the work of Shadow Prince, just like Anthony. That guy didn't use the appearance of a god. He would commonly use an incarnation to mount a sneak attack on mankind's legend wizards. He would never miss a hit. If Marvin didn't guess wrong, Hathaway was definitely in seclusion, trying to break through the final doorstep to the legend rank. Even if something like the sky and earth turning upside down happened at Magore's Academy, she wouldn't take care of it, let alone a very young wizard apprentice suffering an inexplicable curse. If not for Magore's teachers treasuring Wayne's talent, he might have already been abandoned. The medicine and spells to delay the curse's outbreak were quite expensive after all. The old butler's letter was quite clear about it. Wayne's current situation could only be kept up for 10 days at most. And the selection had been delayed, but the deadline was 2 weeks, leaving Marvin with little time. "I'll go personally," Marvin firmly decided. "But the territory," Anna awkwardly said. "Tell anyone outside that I'm recuperating." "There is nothing to be done about it," Marvin muttered. "Keep proceeding with my decrees. I'll have to trouble you with the specifics." "Understand." Anna nodded solemnly. "The strength of the territory is still a bit weak, but I'll take care of this issue. Gru and his Bramble team are pretty talented, and they probably won't be willing to be adventurers all their lives. Don't worry about money. Do your utmost to recruit them." Marvin instructed. With the Bramble team, White River Valley would be a lot safer. Anna nodded. "I'll let Agate follow you. Even if she is still somewhat weak, she should be able to deal with a few things. Also, if a young girl comes, bringing her mother from Rivershore City, take care of her. Her name is Isabel." Also, Marvin quickly gave her a series of numerous strategic decisions. It took no less than an hour. He gave Anna a lot of arrangements in order to deal with any matter, regardless of its importance. And this diligent butler had been continuously taking notes on Marvin's orders. Marvin finally clapped his hands. "Help me get Gru. Let him know that I found a book which has the cure to his daughter's plague." Anna hesitatingly said, "Could it be that you want to tell the truth?" Marvin laughed. "Of course not. I'll tell him that Masked Twin Blades told me that he can join up with him in Rivershore City. There go. After taking care of these, I'll need to make some preparations for the journey." things happened too quickly. Even though Marvin had always been good at handling all kinds of tasks quickly, he still felt it was a bit tricky. Taking the normal route, you would go down the road through River Shore City toward the northwest and cross the deathly silent hills and the Despair Hills in the middle before reaching the Moonlight Forest. Then continue north and you'd arrive at the Three Ring Towers domain. This was close to a week-long journey. You would be delayed. If I directly cross the Despair Hills, I can arrive at the Moonlight Forest in 2 days. If my luck is good, I'll be able to catch the Moonlight Forest hot air balloon and arrive at the Three Ring Towers the next day. Marvin drew a straight line on a rough map, memories about those places surfacing before his eyes. His rich adventuring experience played a great role at this moment. There were a lot of dangerous places on this route, but there were also a lot of areas with plenty of good things. Despair Hills was after all close to Jewel Bay, the area Marvin was most familiar with. If I'm lucky, before arriving to the Three Ring Towers, I should be able to get a few first-rate curved daggers. As Marvin stared at some areas on the straight line, a few memories began to emerge. But before that, he still had to make a trip to Rivershore City. Regardless of how, Gru's daughter's plague had to be taken care of. If Anna failed her recruitment, lending help this time would be a major bargaining chip. He hoped that before he left White River Valley this time, the armed forces could be a little bit stronger. After all, the recruitment for the garrison was still in progress, but it was still somewhat weak. More or less like this. Rest for an hour, then set off. Marvin put survival necessities into the void conch and began to rest. At midnight, a fast horse left the castle town, going straight for Rivershore City. Self-defense. Armor break and parry properties were on two totally different sides. A dagger that can parry, what the hell? Marvin couldn't help but want to mock the enchanter who added that property to this dagger. However, after thinking it over, he felt that this seemingly useless parry attribute might actually be useful depending on the situation. Along with the fact that Marvin wasn't a thief, even if he was able to keep up great offense and flexibility with a curved dagger in his right hand and a dagger in his left, it would still weaken the might of his two-weapon fighting. As a result, Marvin could only use this dagger as a third weapon. He replaced the common dagger at his waist with the Kingfisher J dagger. At a critical time, he could let go of his curved dagger and grab this dagger to attack. This gave him a wide range of attack patterns. The only unfortunate thing was that the treasure chest hadn't given a curved dagger. If it had been an uncommon curved dagger, Marvin's fighting would have gone up one rank. After dealing with the problems with the territory, I must get a pair of first-rate curved daggers, Marvin thought. Dual-wielding rangers made a living through their blades, wielding a pair of common daggers all day long. Isn't that shameful? Besides the bottle and the dagger, there was still an envelope inside the chest. The envelope was sealed with wax. Well, this shepherd was already dead. After inspecting the envelope and confirming that there wasn't anything like a trap or a curse, he opened it. It contained a letter written in the shepherd's special code. Marvin searched through his noble's language mastery, but unfortunately, he found out that he wasn't able to read the shepherd-coded language. This wasn't surprising. The shepherd organization, the plague god followers, and the twin snakes of doom were all active evil forces in Feinan Continent. They had a special system and internal secret codes used for communication, and everyone who wasn't shepherd would find it quite difficult to pierce the coded language. Their archenemy was the Northern Migratory Bird Council. This was a powerful force formed by druids, which had no lack of powerful legendary-level druids. The shepherds were sowing highly toxic seeds everywhere, seeds that agitated living creatures. This made the druids quite resentful. As people in charge of maintaining nature's harmony, they were giving their all to annihilate the shepherds. Perhaps the druids would understand shepherd language. After taking care of the loot, Marvin no longer needed to stay in the mine. After checking the surroundings one more time to make sure that he hadn't missed anything, he started going back toward the mine entrance. He didn't meet any earth spirits this time, but he soon found out that when he arrived, everyone at the camp was already awake and fully prepared for battle. Most of the adventurers were hiding in gaps in the walls by the mine entrance or behind obstacles in the camp. Only the White River Valley garrison members were standing behind the fortification, ready to fight. Far away in the darkness, a torch was raised. A few flickering, glowing eyes could be seen along with it. The gnolls had arrived. They came so fast. I thought it would take them at least until noon tomorrow. I didn't expect that gnoll sorcerer to be so decisive. They actually came before dawn. Marvin quietly and stealthily walked to Anna's side. He made some inquiries to understand the situation. This pack of gnolls had rushed here and just arrived. Fortunately, both rangers were on lookout at the time. One of them an archer named Joey. Joey had the same class. However, he had an innate specialty, far sight. His eyes were very sharp. He was even able to detect the stealthy gnoll scouts in the dark. It was thanks to this guy's formidable power that they were able to avoid being sneak attacked. Reportedly, there were 4 gnoll scouts stealthily approaching the camp. But Joey reacted and ruthlessly shot them down. This made Marvin have a whole new level of respect toward him. These guys had some skills indeed. He used a 6-arrow scatter shot. Of them, 4 arrows hit their targets, Anna whispered. This kind of marksmanship is rarely seen even among pure-blood elves. Marvin nodded. He didn't need Anna to say a lot, as he also knew that this kind of ability was outstanding. Also, apart from farsight, Joey definitely had another amazing specialty, or he wouldn't have been able to do that. Such a talented person, Marvin had this thought. What do we do now? After the gnoll sneak attack failed, they decided to be cautious and didn't attack again, Anna asked, whispering. She made the adventurers hide in the mine, where the gnolls couldn't see. That way they only displayed a part of their strength, the garrison team members and Joey. This was a very smart move. Roughly how many gnolls? Marvin asked. As there was no moonlight tonight, his vision was around 0. Unable to see the amount of enemies was normal. I don't know. Anna gravely shook her head. Their group only consisted of ordinary humans with no dark vision. Joey only had relied on his perception to notice the scouts, nothing more. He wasn't able to tell how many gnolls were eyeing them. It doesn't matter, we can wait. It'll be dawn soon. If I'm not wrong, this pack of gnolls will attack after dawn. We follow the original plan, said Marvin after thinking it over. After saying that, he found a bunker and took a proper rest. Why would the gnolls attack after dawn? It's simple. Their eyes were similar to those of wild wolves. In the middle of the night, they would glow with a weak green light, and humans are able to completely hide themselves in the dark. Thus, they would turn into live targets if they failed to sneak attack. They would suffer a lot more. That gnoll sorcerer wasn't a fool. On the contrary, a sorcerer able to control a tribe was usually very clever. He would certainly not waste the lives of his own subordinates. They would attack after dawn. It was the best alternative. Little had he imagined that Marvin had already set up a bigger trap. Everything went just as Marvin expected. With the failure of the sneak attack, they didn't have to worry about the gnolls attacking. They were resting and reorganizing outside the northern part of the mine. Aside from a few mutated aardwolves howling from time to time, the rest of the gnoll troop was waiting. This kind of situation was actually quite rare, because it didn't match the gnoll's characteristics. Marvin was actually quite happy about this because those always unruly gnolls being organized like this meant one thing. That gnoll sorcerer was among their formation. That guy came. Don't even think of leaving. Marvin was quite excited, even though he was still taking a nap. A first-rank ranger killing a second-rank sorcerer was actually quite challenging, let alone on a chaotic battlefield. Thinking of this made his blood boil. Even with Marvin's strength and experience, he also needed some luck. The steam stove was removed, only leaving a huge brazier. A strange plant was burning in the brazier. This plant was known as amethyst sprout, a kind of bitter grass with no nutritional value. Only the poorest and lowest people would use it to rear some animals and such. The burning of the amethyst sprout would form a kind of very irritating purple smoke. Yet Marvin still told Gru to close the door and window. Then, they tied Lyle's arms and feet to the bed. Now you can go outside. You might not want to see what happens next, Marvin calmly said. If you want to stay, just promise me that you won't stop me regardless of what I do to your daughter. Father, don't leave me. I don't want to stay in the same room as this lunatic, Lyle shouted in a hoarse voice. Gru showed a painful expression. Masked twin blades had no reason to harm him. He bit his lips and went to Lyle's bedside. Darling, trust me. Even if this person is somewhat unreasonable, he did come here in order to save you. You have to trust me. I love you, darling. He then kissed Lyle's foreheads before taking a deep glance at Marvin, before leaving the room. Only Marvin and the sobbing Lyle were left in the room. You are a stupid woman. But surely you aren't stupid enough to not notice that your best friend had a hand in your situation? Marvin took out the Kingfisher jade dagger from the void conch while calmly speaking. The purple smoke had already covered the whole room, so much that Lyle even began coughing. She was silent for a moment before shaking her head. Impossible. Chini has no reason to do something like that. People would do anything to survive. Marvin arrived next to Lyle and said in a low voice, Your father loves you very much. Lyle painfully looked at Marvin. What are you going to use to cure me? Pop. She didn't even finish her sentence when Marvin already used his dagger to cut open her clothes. Ah! A shriek echoed in the room. Gru sitting outside, fighting the urge to run back in, before finally deciding to endure. All kinds of screams could be heard for the next hour. By then her voice had become very hoarse. Blue veins were palpitating on Gru's forehead. He had thought about breaking the door and rushing in many times. If Masked Twin Blades was really doing something to his daughter, he was unable to imagine what he would do. At that time, the door creaked open, showing what was inside. Masked Twin Blades walked out from the inside, carrying someone on his shoulder. I'll take this one away. Your daughter has no more issues. At worst, she might have had a severe fright. You should comfort her. I think a change of environment would do good. Rivershore City isn't very peaceful these days. She would mix with those low people all day long, so naturally it would be hard to avoid danger. Don't you think? Mr. Gru was already looking at the sleeping Lyle. Even if she was still pale, she was actually sleeping peacefully. She had never been able to sleep properly lately. What do you mean, Mr. Masked Twin Blades? Gru woke up from his trance and asked. Marvin quickly walked down the stairs, still carrying Chini. White River Valley is a good choice. The atmosphere there isn't bad, and the people aren't bad either. Gru deeply saluted Marvin. Understand. As the night grew darker, in a room of an abandoned warehouse. Splash! A basin of water was thrown at Chini's face. Tell me where you normally preach or gather, Marvin said in a cold voice. Chini regained consciousness. Seeing the vicious Marvin, a look of despair appeared on her face. No, I can't say. They will kill me. That wasn't my idea. They forced me to do something like that. Or else they would kill me. They would force those insects down my throat. Chini said, weeping. Marvin remained indifferent. She might have her fair share of troubles, but her poisoning her own best friend with dark sweet poison was an incontestable fact. Marvin had never been one to show mercy. The only reason she was still alive was because he wanted to follow the lead. Originally, Marvin only wanted to quickly cure Lyle's plague and then recruit Gru to White River Valley. But an unexpected piece of news made him change his plan. A quest had quietly appeared in his quest menu. Plague Purge. You found traces of dark sweet poison in Rivershore City and successfully helped a small girl get rid of it. Perhaps you should try to help more people. Of course, you can choose to eradicate the source before the upcoming storm. The quest reward was 3,000 general EXP and at least 1 point of regional myth. Marvin's experience requirements were extremely high. Even if he had many ways to level up quickly, many of those methods were extremely risky. But clearing this quest seemed quite worthwhile. The quest had 2 options. Being a healer would mean that I have to keep treating people infected by the dark sweet poison like I did for Lyle until I reach the fixed number of people. Then the mission would be completed. Or simply get rid of the plague envoy spreading the dark sweet poison in Rivershore City. This was the quickest method. The only risk was the plague envoy's rank. From Lyle condition, that plague envoy's strength should be quite average, at most 2nd rank. But Plague God's followers have always been relatively weak. Even if I don't get involved, Rivershore City would also be able to deal with those brainless guys. Therefore, if he got information about the Plague Envoy's location, Marvin wouldn't mind taking care of it. After all, he was already quite used to things like killing. Not to mention an evil follower. Killing those wouldn't be a psychological burden at all. He was short on time, so he would definitely not go with the first option. Marvin actually didn't do anything bad to Lyle that night. After tearing her clothes, Marvin used the Kingfisher jade dagger to open up a small hole in her abdomen. This hole was neither too big nor too small, roughly 3 centimeters. The clueless Lyle naturally shouted very loudly because she was scared of Marvin's grim action. As for the later shouts, it was because she saw something terrible. Because soon after Marvin opened up the small hole, something crawled out of her abdomen, a maggot. It actually looked like a black worm. She nearly passed out from the scare. There were actually so many horrifying worms crawling in her body. But Marvin quickly caught those worms, throwing them into a jar. Under the amethyst sprout smoke, more and more black worms were lured out before filling 3 jars. After the last black worm was caught by Marvin, he told her that she was fine. Marvin simply helped her sew her wound shut and then gave her a sip of red wine to help her sleep. The excessively frightened young girl fell fast asleep. That's right, the dark sweet poison plague was in fact a parasitic disease. This kind of parasite was known as the black worm. They first entered the body during a meal. Black worm eggs were put into food, and these worms started to grow inside her body, plundering her vitality. Usually, most of the worms would gather around the neck, forming disgusting black spots. Black worms were a kind of God-made life form, completely designed according to the preferences of the plague god. Once a person's body had a certain amount of worms, all the black worms would explode. This explosion would also make the host's body burst open. Blood would splatter everywhere, creating a very frightening scene. The most horrifying part was that black worm eggs would spread through the host's blood. If the blood was splashed on someone else's skin, they would also catch the same illness. In this era of relatively underdeveloped medical science, this kind of plague was definitely very frightening. But Marvin was an exception, as he knew the way to treat dark sweet poison. The smoke from burning the amethyst sprout was extremely enticing to those worms. They would crawl out of the body of the host, and were then caught by Marvin, who was wearing gloves. All the jars were half filled with vinegars. The black worms were most afraid of vinegars. They would thoroughly die from being soaked in it for an hour, and these liquids would turn into a nerve paralysis venom. For Marvin, this was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He had always been lacking poison. He had always wanted to dip his curved daggers, straight daggers, and other weapons in poison, but couldn't do anything about it. Those 3 jars were in fact a good substitute. He originally wanted to leave then, but then that quest appeared, forcing him to change his plans. I don't know what they did to you, but you only have 2 options now. Speak, and I'll let you keep your life, but you'll stay away from Gru's family. Don't speak, and I'll kill you now. An ice-cold, curved dagger was lightly pressed against Cheeny's neck. The masked Marvin looked especially frightening. His emotionless voice was totally in line with ordinary people's image of crazy murderers. Cheeny opened her eyes wide. She shrieked, close to falling apart. I'll talk. I'll talk. Don't kill me. I'll talk. It's a church in the Commoner's District. It originally belonged to the Silver Church, but they rented it from a Silver Church priest. Marvin smiled. Silver Church priests are indeed too greedy. He rented his own church without being clear about the other party's background. Would the Silver God be angry? Someone spread the plague God teachings in his church. TSK, TSK. This God and his priest were considered famous. After getting his answers, Marvin didn't immediately release Cheeny. Rather, he knocked her out again. He had to check the situation first. The Commoner's District was made of a group of people who had certain amounts of family property, but weren't overly rich. These people, for the most part, were ranked adventurers, merchants, craftsmen, and so on. The security here wasn't the best, but wasn't lacking either. In the northwest of the Commoner District was a small church. It was originally a church with a Silver Church priest preaching, but later, the Silver Church priest turned his back on this area's people with their impure faith and their lack of generous contributions. He simply rented it out and left. A ceremony was underway in the basement of the church late at night. More than 10 youths were kneeling on the ground, crazily chanting the plague god's teachings. A man with a black gown was standing on stage, coldly looking down at them. Their faces was filled with fanaticism, but their belief might not necessarily be pure. He had to pick the purest ones to instate as his own subordinates. That way he would curry favor with the plague god. After all, among the plague god's envoys, he was just an average existence. But even so, he still mastered the most basic cleric magic. Distinguished faith. A black halo was emitted from his hand. Light surrounded the 10 youths, coiling around their bodies several times. A few of them had their sight flicker, while some others remained unconcerned, as if they didn't notice that ring of light. Threads immediately appeared in front of the man dressed in black. These threads were coming out of the youths' bodies and were tied to their bodies. The threads were thin, representing whether or not their beliefs was firm. The black-clothed man was very satisfied. In this group of people, there were actually 2 firm believers. They would supply the plague god with a good amount of faith power and have quite a great future. But he wasn't totally happy, because there was one youth who actually had no line. There is actually someone among you that pretended to be a follower and mixed in. Do you think you can cheat the great god's eyes? He fiercely smiled and pointed at one of the youths, showing a terrified expression. I'll let the others see how non-believers end. Saying that, numerous dark-colored fabrics appeared in his hands. Don't. The youth struggled, frightened, but it was no use. The other youths were rushing to push him down, try to prove themselves. The black-clothed man coldly laughed and slowly walked past. At that time, a blurry shadow hidden in the darkness was quietly approaching. Marvin moved very carefully. Ever since he entered the church, every single movement of his was reaching the pinnacle. But he was still somewhat worried. After all, ranger stealth couldn't be compared to a thief's. It had a 40% penalty inside the city. If this cleric's perception was rather high, his sneak attack would fail and it could turn into a tough fight. Marvin wasn't really worried of being forced into a tough fight. He had quite the advantage in this kind of narrow place. He was more fearful of the black-clothed man spells. Plague envoy spells, though they were few, weren't easy to deal with. That kind of spell wasn't deadly, but they were able to throw a curse that would weaken the target's attributes substantially. Even if it was temporary, it would still be quite troublesome. Killing in one blow would definitely be for the best. Marvin slowed down and then stopped where he was. The youth was restrained on the ground 10 steps away. As long as the plague envoy took a few steps forward, he would enter Marvin's attack range. Using hide might be safer. Marvin forced his body to stop moving and then used hide. His body stuck close to a seat in an empty row, like a cat crouched but ready to jump out at any time. This kind of posture was quite straining, but it would give the best guarantee to do a sneak attack. The plague envoy approached. His eyes were focused on that youth all along. To every sect, non-believers passing themselves as followers was something they were unable to tolerate. Kind gods might forgive them, but the plague god had never been one of those. He had to show his might. The silk fabric in his hand was an uncommon item, known as suffering silk, bestowed upon him by the high priest. Once that silk fabric was tied to the youth's body, he would shortly begin to suffer all the pain in the world. In the end, he would try every method to kill himself, in front of the other followers. He had experienced this kind of cruel scene many times in the past, but it was the first time he would be the one carrying it out. He felt somewhat excited. One more step. Marvin was silently gripping his curved dagger, his right foot prepared to kick the ground at any time. But the plague envoy suddenly came to a halt at that moment. A shadow had suddenly appeared in the basement passage. You're late. The plague envoy looked at that person and said, dissatisfied. Marvin's pupils shrunk. Damn, he surprisingly stopped at that time. As long as that plague envoy took one more step forward, Marvin would only need one breath to take him away. But this one step made Marvin's situation extremely awkward. If the cleric reacted, it would be quite troublesome. Fuck, who was it? Marvin was angry. He turned his head to take a look. That man had a thin figure, and his footwork was quite fast. He seemed to have come in from another passage. He quickly arrived in front of the plague envoy, indifferently saying, "It's not that late. Those stupid knights are already on their way. Are you going to leave your young followers?" Knights? Marvin was stunned, but before he could react, he saw the man's face. That man's appearance seemed somewhat twisted under the light of the torch, but Marvin still remembered it perfectly. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Marvin bitterly smiled. It was that shadow spider assassin. Rivershore was so big, yet he actually met this guy 3 times in such a short period of time. The first time was in the deathly silent hills. At that time, the other side let him off the hook with a warning for some reason Marvin didn't know. The second time was outside Miller's house. If at that time Marvin hadn't tricked the other side, he might have ended up in a tricky situation. This time during the Plague God's follower ceremony was the third meeting. Not good. This guy has an extremely high perception. If he notices me, Marvin's heart skipped a beat. His hiding skill had already been seen through in the wilderness. This assassin had an advanced thief class, dark murderer, which had a high perception and dexterity. His blade skills were also exceptionally vicious. If he joined hands with the Plague Envoy, Marvin might eat a big loss this time. He definitely didn't dare to move. Stealth was inferior to hide, so if he remained motionless, he might be able to stay hidden. If he moved, there was a 99% chance that he would be found by that dark murderer. Why did it turn out like this? Marvin inwardly shook his head. He already began his preparations. Even though taking dragon strength once again was quite extravagant, his life was more important. Don't worry, I've already decided. The Plague Envoy squinted as he said, apart from 2 seedlings with especially firm beliefs, the rest humph. The Dark Murderer obviously understood his plan. The other followers would become sacrifices. He shrugged and took a step forward, seemingly wanting to say something. But his shoulders suddenly shook. This was an incredibly small movement. But this move was seen by Marvin, who had been watching each of his actions attentively. Discovered. This was the movement of unsheathing a blade. When Marvin was hiding under that tree, he had carefully watched that guy skinning the brown bear alive. Marvin also noticed a few things concerning his dagger skills. Nothing could be done about it. Since he was discovered, he could only fight. In a split second, Marvin's shadow burst out from his hiding spot, throwing himself at the Plague Envoy. At that same time, the Dark Murderer's body also turned into a quick and powerful shadow, ruthlessly rushing forward. Crack! The Dark Murderer's blade slashed down at the empty seat, breaking a few pieces of chair. Surprise was apparent on his face. Yeah, that sneaky guy was actually able to foresee his attack. Isn't this extremely complicated? And at that moment, Marvin had already arrived in front of the Plague Envoy. The latter was briefly startled, but wasn't flustered. The Envoy was obviously an experienced fighter too, because that one step of distance gave him enough room to leave. But he didn't retreat. Instead, he used a simple putrefaction whirlpool. Marvin squinted as he helplessly jumped to the side, both legs gracefully landing on a chair, getting out of the way of that rotating mass of gas. Putrefaction Whirlpool was a first circle cleric spell, specifically magic of the Plague God's clerics. The effects were quite outstanding. If the Putrefaction Whirlpool came into contact with skin, it would start to fester. This kind of festering wouldn't be deadly, and a tough person would recover in 2 or 3 days. But it would severely affect Marvin's fighting strength in the short term. He had no choice but to dodge it. But dodging this made the Plague Envoy safer. The distance between them grew larger. Marvin gracefully landed on the other side. "It's you? Masked twin blades," the Dark Murderer shouted, startled and pleased. He excitedly looked at Marvin, adding, "I am very pleasantly surprised. I remember our last meeting. I'll definitely chop you into minced meat today." "Oh no, remember that pitiful brown bear? You'll share the same fate." On the other side, the Plague Envoy was also watching him like a tiger eyeing its prey. "Trying to sneak attack me? Who told you to do so?" Marvin frowned. A new foe added to the old foe. This was truly troublesome. The two completely surrounded him. It would be quite difficult for Marvin to break out of the encirclement in a short amount of time. Not to mention, these two guys were second rank class holders, and Marvin was only a level 5 ranger. Even one-on-one, these guys were enough for Marvin after he drank the potion. "Hand this guy over to me," the killer said, looking around. "I have a past enmity with him." The plague envoy frowned and said, "Get it done quickly. We don't have much time. Rest assured, since I receive your money, I'll certainly settle your matter. I, Black Jack, always do what I promised." As Black Jack's voice stopped, his body burst forwards like an artillery shell. Excellent speed. Marvin was almost not able to keep up with his speed. Clang! He barely managed to block a slash with his common curved dagger. As a result, severe pain spread through his wrist. Even though the other side's strength didn't crush him, it wasn't far from the doing so. Both of them were using twin daggers, but Black Jack's mastery of his twin daggers was at least master level, and Marvin was only at the beginner level. This weapon proficiency took time to master and couldn't be improved overnight. It could only be tempered over time. Even though Marvin was very familiar with twin daggers in his past life, that experience could only be displayed by fine control and dagger skills, nothing more. One should know that the difference between master-level curved dagger mastery and beginner-level dagger mastery was enough to completely crush him. Clang! Clang! Marvin struggled to block the other side's ruthless attacks. He rolled a few times in the process, dodging the attacks. But at this time, the plague envoy suddenly took a step forward, as if he wanted to take care of it. "Shitty luck," Marvin gloomily said. The situation could hardly get more difficult. Thus, he simply invited the Shadow Spider Assassin to set up a trap. With both of them acting together, they would kill Gordian. But the Plague Envoy and the Assassin hadn't expected to meet this masked twin blades halfway through the operation. "Truly interesting." Marvin smiled. "You just forced me into a miserable state. I won't let go of the opportunity this time. I'm very sorry, Black Jack, but I have to be careful this time, as even if the Silver Light Knight clearly hates the Plague Envoy, I also have an arrest warrant. Anyway, time to follow and take a look." Marvin quietly used stealth and remained far behind Gordian. Two men, one in front and one behind, went through the passage, finally reaching another basement. This basement was a few times smaller and apparently only had one exit. The Plague Envoy stood on a raised platform, his back facing the Silver Light Knights. "You knew I would chase?" Gordian wasn't an idiot. He also felt that something was wrong, but he didn't retreat. This came from his unwavering confidence in his own strength. It also was because he firmly believed that he had the favor of the Silver God. Divine grace wasn't a skill every Silver Light Knight could have. Not to mention the long sword in his hand, which possessed a bit of divinity and had been blessed by a high-level Silver God priest. This bit of divinity turned his originally good long sword into a weapon able to endure stronger enchantments. Its attributes were very fierce. As a result, Gordian was fearless. Even if his Plague Envoy had some plans, he would still be unable to escape. He had already chased this Plague Envoy several times after all, and he always needed just a bit more to catch him. This made him quite annoyed. He didn't want to lose this chance. He put his left hand on the hilt of his long sword. "Evasive man, I, as a captain of Rivershore City's patrol, will enact justice and capture you." His voice was full of righteousness. The Plague Envoy slowly turned his body, his face full of deceit. "Ha ha ha! Gordian, you are so full of yourself. This Silver Light Knight is quite smart. If he killed or banished that Plague Envoy in the name of the Silver Church, it might lead to the Plague God being resentful. Even if the Silver God didn't fear the Plague God, it would be troublesome to handle. This guy took advantage of his position as a Rivershore City guard. This way, even if the Plague Envoy was killed by him, the Plague God wouldn't be able to say anything." Marvin, still following behind, heard Gordian's pretext and couldn't help but have a whole new level of respect for him. A Silver Church guy indeed. Every single one of them was a businessman. They clearly knew what kind of strategic decision would maximize their benefits. Even this manly guy was no exception. Gordian sneered. "You only invited a few helpers. I'm not worried." He took a step forward after talking, but at that moment, two shadows suddenly jumped from both sides. Assassins. Both of the second rank. Marvin squinted his eyes, thinking, not good. Gordian has too much self-confidence, right? Facing such an obvious trap, he actually didn't try to probe and just walked right on it. But thinking about it, Guardian Knight perception wasn't that high. Missing assassins in stealth was normal. It would be quite difficult to notice stealth assassins without using a detection divine spell after all. Hold on. Blackjack isn't one of them. Shit. Both are using Desperate Strike. Marvin nearly rushed out from his hiding place in the shadows. If Gordian was one shot, staying here would be quite dangerous. 2 advanced assassins' Desperate Strikes. This time, the Plague Envoy spent a lot in order to get rid of Gordian. Not only did he hire a Shadow Spider hitman, he also paid for 2 second-rank assassins. As the 2 shadows were about to hit Gordian, the Silver Light Knight suddenly drew his sword. He was left-handed, but his posture was still exceptionally smooth. In that split second, the sword lit up and a silver mark condensed in a flash. Divine Grace, Silver Protection. Seeing this divine spell being used, Marvin immediately felt relieved. Gordian was indeed not an ordinary Guardian Knight. This guy was definitely an elite Guardian Knight. In an instant, some kind of silver liquid flew out from that silver mark and wrapped, layer upon layer, around Gordian. The 2 assassins' Desperate Strikes did hit the target. They truly hit Gordian with a skill. However, Silver Protection's effect made him immune to damage for 3 seconds. Desperate Strike was a skill with high priority, but it was only a mortal skill after all. Most of those came from the elves in the old eras. But Silver Protection was a divine spell. It came from someone directly under the protection of the Silver God. The 2 assassins used all of their strength to attack, entering a near-death state. But Gordian came out unscathed due to the protection. He looked like a silver statue, standing there, motionless, as if nothing could knock him down. The silvery light disappeared 3 seconds later, and Gordian disdainfully kicked away the 2 assassins at his feet, walking toward the Plague Envoy. "I see you still have some tricks." He laughed. "Desperate Strike doesn't work on me." Although he said that, Marvin noticed that one of the 3 kinds of light surrounding the sword in Gordian's hand had actually disappeared. It had 3 divine spells attached. He already used one of them. Marvin knew a bit more about the situation. The Plague Envoy's strongest card to deal with Gordian should be that Dark Murderer. As expected, Blackjack appeared at this time. Even if Dark Murderer was an advanced stealthy class, it wasn't an assassin, so his stealth effect was average. He simply swaggered in front of Gordian. "Shadow Spider's man?" Gordian frowned, displaying a serious expression for the first time. He could feel that this guy was quite strong. Got paid for the work. This time, Blackjack surprisingly looked quite professional. He didn't say much and attacked. The twin daggers in his hands were extremely sharp, like a storm. Even his normal attacks would leave after images. He must have a personal or class specialty, increasing his attack speed. Marvin speculated. Marvin knew a few decent trained specialties, and among those was one that he must definitely get. And this Dark Murderer displayed a fast attack speed. It indicated that he must have a specialty that raised attack speed. This was something Marvin needed the most. Gordian was indeed strong, at least stronger than Marvin by a whole lot. Facing the Dark Murderer's attacks, he used his sword to block and was also able to counterattack. In a duel, Gordian has more chances to win. It's a pity that this fight is not a duel. Just as Marvin had this thought, the Plague Envoy joined the battlefield. He didn't have a lot of divine spells, but they were all deadly and had to be used carefully. His presence was the most threatening to Gordian, because if he were hit by some curse, it would change the course of his fight with Blackjack. As expected, the Plague Envoy found an opportunity, and under the cover of the Dark Murderer, a weakness spell hit Gordian. His speed and strength were reduced by at least 30%. Although Gordian immediately used a divine spell, Weakness Immunity, he was a Guardian Knight, not a priest. He could only use a few divine spells. He had already used Mind Blast, Detect Trail, Silver Protection, and Immunity. Even with the divine skills added to the sword, he shouldn't be able to use more than 3 spells. And the Plague Envoy was prepared. He even took out 2 powered magic staves, made in the Southern Wizard Alliance. Even though it was a consumable item, its price was astonishingly high, and its effect was outstanding. Gordian's situation was far from good. Black Jack laughed nastily. Taking advantage of Gordian dodging a divine spell, he launched a fierce blade technique. Rushing Thunder Slash. Can't wait anymore. Marvin no longer hesitated. Still in stealth, he rushed out. But this time, he craftily removed Masked Twin Blades' mask and put on a mouth mask. He was still using twin blades, but there were many people using twin blades. Who would imagine that he was masked twin blades? Give me a hand. We have a common enemy. Marvin rushed out from the shadows and said one sentence to Gordian before rushing back toward the Plague Envoy. The Plague Envoy paled. He immediately whispered something, and a stone wall appeared in front of Marvin. Pointless. Marvin sneered as he rushed on the vertical stone wall and took a few steps on it. Anti-gravity steps. On the other side, Gordian sneakily threw a ring of light over there. Divine spell, divine gift. This divine spell was quite good for Marvin. His strength had always been his weak point. When he fought the with Dark Murderer earlier, it was because of his strength that he was completely suppressed. His mission was to kill the Plague Envoy. The rest could be dealt with later. It only took a few steps before he arrived in front of the Plague Envoy. This time, the Plague Envoy couldn't use a divine spell like Putrefaction Whirlpool, because he already used it before Gordian's arrival, and it was one of the very few interrupting divine spells. Facing the charging Marvin, the Plague Envoy gloomily cursed. He unexpectedly put his hand behind his back and grabbed a large two-handed sword. Marvin was startled and dodged in a hurry. Shit, this guy is actually a fighter. This gave Marvin a headache. He hadn't expected that this Plague Envoy wasn't a priest, but a fighter. Where did the Plague God find this freak? Although, this kind of strange advancement wasn't impossible. Advancing from a fighter to Plague Envoy would make his ability to use divine spells worse than the average Plague Envoys by half. No wonder Marvin felt that this guy was overly cautious when using divine spells. As it turns out, the fucker is a fighter. Marvin hadn't used Inspect because he was afraid that the other would detect him when he was getting ready to sneak attack. This time, he hurriedly used Inspect after dodging the two-handed sword. Marvin didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw the results. The other side had the following classes. Fighter LVL 5, Plague Envoy LVL 2. Please, if he was a fighter, shouldn't the advanced class Plague Knight be a better pick? Marvin sneered. After the initial surprise, he started to relax quite a bit, because this Plague Envoy turned out to be a lot easier to deal with. What Marvin feared the most was that the other side would continuously throw curses. If he was hit, even if he killed the Plague Envoy, he would also be in trouble. But the other side was a fighter, which basically meant that his divine spells were already used up. He was swinging the two-handed sword skillfully, but Marvin was someone who reached the 20 dexterity threshold, and Rangers originally restrained fighters. His footwork became ghost-like, suddenly taking advantage of the Plague Envoy's swing. A small body sneaked under the Plague Envoy's arm. Shadow steps. He was as fast as lightning. The Plague Envoy couldn't do anything about it. Marvin's curved daggers were raised horizontally, skillfully linking to the next skill, Cutthroat. You used Cutthroat, 46, on your target. Skill failed. Crack. A weird sound echoed. Cutthroat was unsuccessful, because the Plague Envoy used his last life-saving divine spell at the critical moment. Locust Division. The Plague God's favorite animal was the locust. The moment that divine spell was launched, the Plague Envoy completely turned into locusts, flying with a buzzing noise. Marvin's Cutthroat only hit one or two. The rest all flew out in panic. Locust Division? You want to flee? Gordian, suppressing the Dark Murderer on the other side, loudly shouted. He immediately took out a huge pouch. This pouch looked like it was made from linen, but nevertheless, it was a real magic item. Worthy of being a silver church kite, he actually is quite well off. He is a second-rank knight with 2 magic items. Marvin watched with envy. As a transmigrator, how many uncommon items did he get? Even his twin daggers were both common weapons. How could it be? Marvin recognized this pouch. It was an exorcism pouch made by a high-level silver church priest. This pouch was like the wishful rope, having many different uses. It was quite helpful and very much worth it. He watched as Gordian opened the pouch. A gust of wind blew out from inside, and the majority of the locusts fell down on the ground. The plague envoy wanted to flee, but Gordian had been prepared for it. The wind blowing out from the pouch had the special effect of scattering divine power, though its efficacy was rather light. It would have no effect on real divine spells. But Locust Division's nature was a divine power split into countless small parts that would escape by themselves. Even though it was convenient for escape, they would be unable to withstand this peculiar wind. Locusts fell on the ground, one after the other. Once they fell, they could only crawl. The plan was successful. The plague envoy couldn't escape. Gordian displayed a proud smile. But at this time, Blackjack suddenly launched a reverse slash, not taking advantage of the situation to escape, but counterattacking instead. Blade skill, Abyss Phantom. His body warped into a black mist, throwing himself toward Gordian. Gordian's expression changed. This was a high-level blade technique, not something like the common rushing thunder/blade technique. Where did that guy learn that? If he kept using the exorcisms bag, he would be cut into pieces by the Abyss Phantom, but there were still a few locusts trying to fly away. Damn it! The Silver Light Knight angrily stomped his feet, put away the pouch, and raised his sword to meet Blackjack's trump card. The wind scattered in the dark basement. There were still 3 locusts doing their best to fly upward. There was an air duct above. They apparently wanted to escape through there. They were already quite high, and Marvin couldn't reach them with a jump. But it's not like he didn't have a solution. Can only rely on luck. Marvin put away his curved daggers and grabbed 2 darts from a pouch tied to his belt. Hidden weapon darts, 24 launched. Whoosh! Whoosh! Darts flew out one by one. The 6th dart hit managed to hit a locust, nailing it to the ceiling. The 13th also hit the 2nd locust. But the 3rd locust was approaching that tiny air vent. As long as a single locust escaped, the plague envoy would escape. All of Marvin's and Gordian's efforts would go down the drain. Marvin had time to throw 2 more darts before the last locust escaped. But his accuracy was quite low. It's a gamble. In an instant, Marvin made a decision. He grabbed 5 darts in each hand. If his accuracy was no good, he might as well use coverage. Anyways, that air vent was so small. Marvin put power in his throw, and the 10 darts flew together in a messy formation, all flying toward that small air vent. The locust's body was quite small, but when the small swarm of darts flew toward it, it flapped its wings faster. It was quite difficult to avoid that swarm. Thud! A clear sound could be heard. One of the darts pierced the body of the locust. At that instant, the small body grew larger, turning into the plague envoy and falling to the ground. Already dead, Marvin took a long breath. He had been quite lucky. It was a blind throw. It was also thanks to Gordian releasing the wind of the exorcism's pouch, weakening the locusts. Otherwise, with the locust's nimbleness, Marvin wouldn't have been able to hit. After killing the plague envoy, Marvin's quest was also completed. Plague Purge completed. Quest reward obtained. 3,000 General EXP. As for the regional myth, it still didn't appear. Marvin guessed it should appear tonight, once the story of what happened there spread. The Plague Envoy's kill EXP wasn't too bad either, giving 560 battle EXP. Marvin was already quite satisfied by this. On the other side, Gordian saw Marvin successfully killing the Plague Envoy and was immediately overjoyed. When he freed his hands to face Blackjack, the latter wasn't offering much resistance anymore. Those 2 assassins who had failed their desperate strikes had moved cleverly and slipped away at some point. Marvin felt some regret for letting those 2 experience packs go free because he had urgently needed to take care of the Plague Envoy. Since my employer is dead, I don't have any reason to keep fighting. Blackjack suddenly retreated, gloomily looking at Gordian. Silver Light, I'll remember you. But do you know who that masked man at your side is? I can tell you. He is the one making noise in the troubled Rivershore city, masked Twin Blades. Maybe you should catch him now. His voice faded, and he suddenly disappeared. Secret skill vanish. Marvin's heart sunk. This guy's strength was quite amazing, yet he would still use this kind of method. No wonder he had felt perfectly safe. But it was bad now, as only Marvin and Gordian were left in the basement. The Silver Light Knight slowly turned and looked at Marvin solemnly. "You are masked twin blades?" Marvin didn't answer. He simply went to the Plague Envoy's body, gently and cautiously groping the corpse for a moment. Gordian frowned, obviously annoyed at Marvin's action. But since the Plague Envoy was indeed Marvin's kill, it was logical that he would look for loot. Marvin didn't get a lot of things, just a pouch containing a few wizard gold coins, followed by 3 powered magic staves. These are the lowest level of powered magic staves, yet they were still very expensive. 2 of them had already been used, but they could still be used again once charged. The 3 magic staves all had a first circle spell attached. After examining the runes for a bit, Marvin found that the usable magic staff had a freezing rain spell attached to it. A very average area of effect, AoE, spell. It would actually be quite useful to scare away large groups of gnolls. Marvin didn't dare to take the rest of the stuff. The Plague Envoy was a Plague God follower. It would be quite sad if he took something he shouldn't and attracted the Plague God's attention as a result. Marvin stood up once he was done sorting the loot. The words of a shadow spider hitman. "Do you believe him?" Gordian took a deep look at Marvin. Even though his battle with the Dark Murderer was fierce, he still managed to see Marvin's astonishing skill. This was definitely not an ordinary guy. As for famous dagger wielders in Rivershore City these days, it seems that there was only masked twin blades. But he merely shook his head, leaning to the side. Marvin calmly left. The Silver Light Knight originally came to arrest or kill the Plague Envoy. Since he got what he came for, he would naturally not look for additional trouble, even if that guy was really masked twin blades. He did save his life. If it wasn't for Marvin joining the fight, no matter how powerful Gordian was, he would have had a bad end under the joint attack of Blackjack and the Plague Envoy. Thus, Gordian simply turned a blind eye and let Marvin go. Even though they got rid of the Plague Envoy, Rivershore City's dark sweet poison incident wasn't completely settled. Because the Plague Envoy had already spread eggs in some pitiful guise, the dark sweet poison would still be spreading, just on a lesser scale than what had happened in the game. This would certainly affect the course of history as Marvin knew it. He didn't know what kind of result it would bring. 3,000 General EXP greatly helped with Marvin's current crisis. An advanced class needed a large amount of experience. Even if it was just to get Ranger to level 6, it would require as much as 4,800 EXP. Marvin had already planned his advancement path. Rangers had a lot of advanced classes, covering all kinds of paths. There were at least 15 advanced classes. It was the most complicated class. Ultimately, it was because Ranger was a jack-of-all-trades class. They were able to shoot from a distance, able to fight in melee range, and also able to tame beasts and connect to nature. That's why there were all kinds of advancement paths. But there was only one that could lead to the final advancement ruler of the night. Night Walker, a seemingly very average second-rank class. It didn't have the fierceness of Dark Murderer, nor the cold-blooded feeling of the elite marksman. This was an advanced class that was usually neglected. All the skills seemed to be relatively mediocre. At least it was so in the game. Very few Ranger players had picked the Night Walker class at the start. Not only did this advanced class have mediocre abilities, but the advancement was also very troublesome. No one likes to do something arduous and thankless. Until later on, after a Night Walker property was found. That group of weird Rangers had unprecedented fighting strength at nighttime. It was all because of the existence of the hidden Night Kill specialty in the Night Walker class. Night Kill. Level 1. Attack +2 at night. Special effect. Upon killing at night, you will receive the target's soul fragment. Continuously gathering these soul fragments would increase the Night Kill level. Level 1 Night Kill only gave a +2 attack, but it would become very frightening later on. Attack and attack speed, and even piercing effect would appear. During nighttime, a Night Walker with level 3 Night Kill would be capable of dealing with 3 experts of the same level. As a result, the Night Walker class was also known as the Night Demon. At nightfall, they would ready their knives. They were the demons hiding in the darkness of the night. Even if this specialty couldn't completely make up for the mediocrity of its skills, it still created a lot of experts. It could even be said that this was a very unbalanced class. Weak during the day, extremely powerful during the night. This kind of imbalance made this class stability inferior. However, Marvin was an exception. He wasn't lacking killing skills. He was proficient in all of the Phantom Assassin skills. He could use the moves in battle and then use battle experience to learn them. He had all the means to make up for Night Walker's shortcomings. Moreover, the fall of the universe magic pool would attract an ancient heavenly beast to Feinan Continent. Even though the gods worked together to kill that heavenly beast, its dead body still covered a good part of Feinan's sky, casting a huge shadow. From that point on, Feinan's night would last longer than the day. The night would last about 14 hours, and the day would last about 10 hours. This was also one of the reasons Marvin firmly decided to pick the ruler of the night advancement path. Night Walker was definitely one of the most fitting classes for Feinan's environment. But if he wanted to advance to Night Walker, Marvin still needed to find a teacher. This kind of secret class was not as simple as the Ranger class, where one only needed to settle the matter of the recommendation letter. Night Walkers had an organization with few members. However, to join their organization, one had to pass a strict examination. Marvin knew the location of one of the members of the Night Walkers organization. He just happened to be in the Three Ring Towers region, but that guy was a bit quirky. Regardless, after his fight with the Dark Murderer, Marvin found out he was still lacking. Even though he leveled up very quickly, it was still not enough. If he was unable to protect himself, what about his loved ones? The advancement had already been planned. As for enhancing his strength, there were many options. For example, it was time to get a couple first-rate curved daggers. He knew a place where he might be able to get weapons he wanted. Maybe he could increase his own dagger mastery level on the way. Still being at the beginner level for an ex-ruler of the night. This wouldn't do. However, he still needed to do something before leaving Rivershore City. A shadow was quickly approaching the city gates. A second-rank Phantom Assassin, Marvin, hiding behind the city wall, saw him coming and quickly went out. Lord, Kyle Amber noticed Marvin and quickly gave him an elven salute. As an elf created by the old elven god, Amber couldn't increase his strength. But Marvin's subordinate was a second-rank assassin, a force to be reckoned with. In order to kill those two barbarians, Amber and Agate had both used Desperate Strike. It had been a long time, and they were gradually recovering bit by bit. Their strength was still not at their peak, clearly displaying the ruthlessness of this skill. It wasn't only ruthless to others, but also to themselves. Amber's presence in Rivershore City was naturally planned beforehand by Marvin. He let the Lynx team safely leave only to follow the trail and catch the one hiding behind. In fact, when they left, Amber had been secretly following them back to Rivershore City. "Have you found anything?" Marvin asked. The Lynx team was only a group of adventurers. Marvin didn't really care about them. He cared about the one behind them. "I have," Amber bluntly replied. "I already discovered the one hiring Vern to make troubles. His name is Tasharoya, the son of a northern city lord who arrived a while back. He is quite wealthy, and it is said that he is related to the current city lord's proxy." I eavesdropped on his conversation with Vern. He wants something inside White River Valley. But based on what he said, something happened, and his plan against White River Valley was put on hold. The son of a northern city lord, Tasharoya, apparently had something secret planned for White River Valley. The only good news was that he had temporarily put his plan on hold. This was the information Amber heard, but combined with Marvin memories, it was enough to make an accurate guess. As an ex-legend, Marvin was familiar with the game's history, whether it was official announcements of various events or players' clues from various missions. Everything was recorded in his mind. In Feinan Continent, players who joined the world as the Golden Generation arrived half a year after the Great Calamity. But there were still 6 months until the Calamity. If it was anyone else, they might have felt familiar, yet unfamiliar with this world. But they weren't like Marvin, who just remembered everything regardless of its importance. If I'm not wrong, the Rivershore City Lord is a third-rank wizard. She had been studying magic for a long time, so a proxy was put in place. As a result, Rivershore City's officials are extremely corrupt. They lack someone supervising and managing them. But in a short time, just a bit after the dark poison outbreak, the Rivershore City Lord would come out and settle the plague, God followers, and purge the city hall. Marvin recalled those details. If he wasn't wrong, it was highly probable that Tasharoya's issue was this. He was good friends with the city hall officials thanks to his relationship with the city lord's proxy. But what about it? In the end, Rivershore City was not his territory. The true city lord had probably come out, so no wonder he had such a headache. On the other hand, Marvin was relieved. At the very least, in the short term, White River Valley shouldn't have much trouble. This was the critical summer sowing time. This year's harvest was very important. White River Valley had just experienced a Knoll invasion, so it wouldn't be able to withstand another crisis. Keep watching. If you find anything harmful to White River Valley, report to Anna straight away. Marvin ordered. Understood, Lord. After acknowledging that she'd heard, Amber disappeared into the shadows, and Marvin wouldn't stay idle either. He left Rivershore City very late in the night. Following his planned itinerary under the moonlight, Marvin didn't use the main road, going through small paths instead. He would lose too much time if he went there normally. Marvin took a crisis-filled shortcut. Of course, after this crisis, he would likely come out with considerable gains. There were two mountainous areas north of Rivershore City. In the northwest were the criminal-filled, deathly, silent hills. Marvin previously went to the abandoned altar in the deathly silent hills to sacrifice the Lich's finger. He had gotten a +1 dexterity blessing along with 2 elven subordinates. In the northeast was the Necromancer territory, the Despair Hills. The true main road, fortunately, went between the two hills. It curved toward the northwest, and then, after passing through Crow's Claws, it would curve once again northeast. It was more or less a Z-shaped path. The main reason was because of the strength of necromancers. There was a death monarch many years ago who had turned this place into a paradise for the dead. Even Rivershore City's lord wouldn't rashly step into this area. A legend monarch was sleeping there, and there were also 3 third-rank great soul wizards watching the place. There were also mentions of liches, bone devils, and so on. Ordinary people wouldn't dare enter the Despair Hills. In fact, they couldn't enter even if they wanted to. The necromancers viewed the Despair Hills as their domain, and as such, they put barriers in the north and the south so that non-necromancers would find entering very hard. The Ghost Valley was at the southern barrier. After following the path for a long time, Marvin arrived at the Ghost Valley. You found a Ghost Valley. Knowledge +1. Knowledge, Geography, Ghost Valley. The Necromancer's southern barrier. The living are not allowed inside. At dawn, Marvin was standing in front of the Ghost Valley. A cold wind was blowing, making him, with his 9 constitution, clearly uncomfortable. But he still walked in without any hesitation. After 10 steps, a stele with scarlet words appeared in front of Marvin. The living are not allowed inside. This is the land of the dead. Non-necromancer living beings were not welcome. Marvin was a ranger. He couldn't enter the Ghost Valley under normal circumstances. If he tried to force his way in, the guards wouldn't hesitate to tear him into pieces. Behind the stele was an endless thick fog. If one recklessly charged in, he would end up eaten by the monsters in the fog. Marvin stopped in front of the stele and lightly knocked on the scarlet words. His knocking followed a certain rhythm. 3 light knocks, 1 heavy knock. He repeated this 3 times, when suddenly, a mournful shriek echoed beside his ears. Damn it, another fear check. Marvin covered his ears and couldn't help but mumble something. With his platycodon flower badge, he would naturally not be afraid of a minor ghost fear skill. Fear check success. Fear ineffective. This event reflected the importance of the Headless Girl's gift. Without the platycodon flower badge, Marvin might have hesitated to cross the Despair Hills. But with this effective item, he was confident enough. But even though the fear skill was ineffective, That ghost voice was still quite sharp, making Marvin quite uncomfortable. This was a female ghost whose appearance was actually quite pretty, but it seemed her brain was a bit lacking, because she had been continuously shrieking ever since she appeared. If there were any animals in the surrounding 5 kilometers, they were definitely woken up. "Shut up!" Marvin angrily roared. "Quickly open the door." The woman ghost suddenly threw herself at Marvin, shrieking, "The living are not allowed inside. The living are not allowed inside. I'm not a normal living being," Marvin said, unperturbed. He took out High Spell Book from his void conch. This was a necromancy spell book given as a result of a transaction between the grave robber and a low-level necromancer. On the book was an identity imprint. It could let Marvin smoothly enter Despair Hills. It turns out to be the filthy grave robber. The ghost intelligence was very low, but she unexpectedly recognized this imprint. This scared Marvin witless. The next instant, she pulled on the steel and the entrance opened. "Why did you change your look? You must have used a weird technique to make yourself more handsome. Get in quickly, filthy grave robber." Marvin was stunned for a breath. That low-level ghost was really tricked. He then silently entered. Cold wind, dark sky, dark land, bones everywhere, whales everywhere. Are people really living in this place? As Marvin walked quickly on the Despair Hills, he couldn't help but ridicule those people inside. From time to time, ghostly wails could be heard. It made one feel numb. Is anyone able to sleep in this place? Those necromancers must have quite the nerves. A flock of bats flew in the sky. They flew around Marvin for a moment, not doing anything. Most spirits would have their intelligence corroded from the negative energy, making them easier to trick. But necromancers were different. These guys were too crafty. Marvin definitely didn't want to meet a necromancer, especially a high-rank necromancer, as Marvin wouldn't be his match. But fortunately, this territory was wide enough. Necromancers were basically nerds. They would enter a coffin or research in a cemetery for 10 days to half a month and rarely come out. So Marvin was still relatively safe. From the Ghost Valley to the North Skull Valley would take, at most, 10 hours. Crossing the Despair Hills, that guy's territory, then the Moonlight Forest in the north, and finally riding a hot air balloon for the 3 ring towers. As long as there's no problem on this part of the road, the rest would be smooth. Marvin was thinking while maintaining an uniform pace. This kind of pace was the most stamina efficient. Marvin's constitution was average, resulting in mediocre stamina. He had to save what he could. He followed the route he remembered for about 6 hours, not meeting any danger so far, until he arrived under a large locust tree. There clearly was a problem at this locust tree. Marvin stopped. At that time, someone jumped out of the locust tree. It was a pale youth. He said to Marvin, "A disaster is imminent. Flee, flee." Before Marvin could react, a loud rumbling noise echoed behind him. Marvin's face changed. He couldn't help but curse in a rough voice. "Damn it. Is it a ghost uprising?" That youth nodded. "Yes, I accidentally. Run." Marvin didn't bother talking further and broke into a run. Marvin's dexterity was quite high, so his running speed was quite fast. But he hadn't expected that this feeble youth would also be able to run just as fast. And from the way he was fleeing, he seemed quite proficient. Marvin looked at him for a moment. He then suddenly realized that this guy had used haste on himself. Wizards were still great at this before the fall of the Universe Magic Pool era. They could casually use a spell to take care of their speed weakness. It would make them not any slower than the frontline classes. A great number of skeletal warhorses were chasing behind them. These skeletal warhorses were overbearing. Their hooves made the hills shake. In the sky above the warhorses was a huge wave of flying crazy ghosts. Looking at those ghosts, Marvin's face turned green. These ghosts weren't like the low-level ghost he met earlier. They were intelligent, high-level ghosts. If he fought alone, Marvin could barely rely on the holy water to get rid of a dozen. But against so many, Marvin could only flee for his life. "What have you done? How did you cause so many ghosts to rebel?" Marvin angrily roared at the youth. He had totally suffered an unexpected disaster. This kind of scene should be rare in the Despair Hills. Necromancers naturally had an extremely strong urge for control. Very few would have this kind of uprising when controlling their ghosts. It was simply too rare. The youth was panting while following Marvin. I didn't do anything. I just proposed. Nothing more. Proposed? Marvin was stunned. He had always been quick-witted, but shouldn't proposing and a ghost uprising have nothing to do with each other? The skeletal warhorses were very fast, and the two humans had limited stamina. If they kept running like this, they would be overtaken sooner or later. What can I do? Marvin was scratching his head. Regardless of how rich his experience was, he couldn't have foreseen running into a ghost uprising in the Despair Hills. Hide? In these boundless hills, where could he hide? And there were really too many skeletal warhorses. If he hid somewhere, he might end up trampled. Break away? Even more impossible. Those ghosts in the sky were clearly watching those two. It would be difficult to flee from those flying ghosts. It wouldn't be this tragic, right? There is still some dragon strength left from the battle with the Dark Murderer. Should I drink it here? Marvin was once again cursing the youth as useless. In the current circumstances, besides taking dragon strength to raise his dexterity for the flicker specialty, there didn't seem to be any other option, but it was really too extravagant. He was unwilling to take out the bottle from the void conch. But at that moment, the youth suddenly pulled Marvin closer. Follow me. Marvin staggered, nearly falling from being dragged. This guy's strength was very high. Marvin was startled and furiously scolded. What do you think you are doing? The youth panted and pointed to a tomb not far away. My home. They can't enter. Follow me, it's safe. He didn't say anything else and dragged Marvin inside the tomb. Marvin was unable to do anything. This seemingly frail guy had huge strength for some strange reason, making Marvin unable to get free. Two men jumped one after the other in the rather shallow tomb. A black barrier suddenly covered the tomb. 222. 222. The horse's hooves could be heard on top of the black barrier, as numerous skeletal warhorses gathered above them. More and more high-level ghosts began attacking this black barrier. But even though this black barrier seemed quite weak, it was actually extremely hard. Gosh, scare the crap out of me. The youth sat down on the ground, legs crossed. I'm completely exhausted. Marvin remained silent. He still hadn't understood what was going on. This tomb is your home. And what's going on with these ghosts? He asked. The youth patted his head, chanting an incantation. Marvin only felt his body calm down. The youth who caused the ghost uprising in the Despair Hills was called Fidel. Even though he looked young, he was in fact more than 40 years old. His home was actually under the tomb, a spacious underground cave. Someone living in this kind of place was definitely a necromancer, but this guy was a freak. In general, necromancers didn't have good opinions of regular people. But Marvin didn't sense the least bit of evil intent from Fidel. This guy was simply a freak necromancer. Not only was he familiar from the start, he also loved chatting, to the point of being a chatterbox. While hiding from the ghost uprising above them, Marvin also had to endure Fidel's complaints. But the truth made Marvin dumbfounded. You said you fell in love with a lich? Hold on, aren't liches genderless? Well, she used to be a beautiful woman. I understand. So you proposed? It looks like your proposal was rejected. Then you offended her, and she used her ghost army to deal with you? So it turns out it's not a ghost uprising, but someone controlling them. Marvin felt that this was ridiculous. A necromancer and a lich, this kind of pairing, there weren't a lot of those in all of Feinan, right? Wait a minute. Something suddenly clicked together in Marvin's brain. Necromancer, Fidel, lich. Could it be that this guy would be the famous mad lich Fidel of Despair Hills in the future? That abnormal mad guy that made every player who entered the Despair Hills lose out greatly? He didn't look the same at all, though. Marvin recalled the player's description of mad lich Fidel. It didn't look like that chatterbox necromancer. Wait, someone did mention him being a chatterbox. Even though Marvin had first appeared in the Jewel Bay last time, but he had been living mostly in the areas north of Jewel Bay, seldom setting foot south of the Despair Hills. With regard to the Mad Lich story, he knew a bit, but he didn't remember much. Damn, even if I failed this time, it'll definitely work next time, Fidel said to himself. He made some tea for Marvin, but the latter didn't dare to drink. Heavens knew what necromancers liked to put in their tea. I spent a large amount to buy 999 roses from an unscrupulous northern merchant. Why did Sasha not like it? Fidel sat there, distressed. He started pondering, completely ignoring Marvin. Sasha? Marvin saw the light. He remembered. Sasha was the name of that lich. It was said that before she turned into a lich, she was a very beautiful woman. A few memories flashed through Marvin's mind, and he finally remembered the whole story of the Mad Lich. It's just that he suddenly felt a little sad. He stood up and went to pat Fidel's shoulder. Hey, rest assured, maybe next time will be a success. The Mad Lich's story was a bit funny, yet quite miserable. Fidel and Sasha were a pair of close friends. They were wizard apprentices who liked each other. But because of an unusual accident, Sasha turned into a lich. A good-looking young girl suddenly turned into a skeleton. No one would be able to stand it, so her temperament changed. Even if she had huge magic power, she had forever lost her human body. She became violent, irritable, and stayed away from other people. But one person didn't abandon her. That was Fidel. Fidel followed Sasha to Despair Hills, advancing to become a necromancer on the way. For a long time, Sasha completely ignored Fidel. Whenever Fidel tried to get close, she would use strong magic power to drive him out. But she didn't want to harm him. It was precisely because of this that those skeletal warhorses, which should normally be able to catch them, were lagging behind. This was the lich controlling them from the back. She didn't want the man she loved to look at her current miserable state, so she chose to repel the man far away. In the game, Fidel didn't give up on pursuing Sasha, even though she turned into a lich. After one of his failed attempts, he thought that the reason why Sasha didn't want to meet him was because he was human and she was a lich. Therefore, he asked a high-level lich to turn himself into a lich. This way, he would be able to be together with Sasha. The ceremony was a success, but the ending was a little sad. After turning into a lich, Fidel looked for Sasha, but he found the good-looking youthful girl he remembered. Fidel had worked hard to turn himself into a lich while the lich worked hard to get back her human body. He was successful. She was successful. She recovered her body by using the body revival skill. But he was no longer human at that time. They both missed each other. This was simply the most painful joke fate picked for them. The two met each other one day, and Fidel fell into madness.